American comic. I have all the skills from Warcraft 3. Chapter 1. Late at night, Manhattan was still bustling. And Hell's Kitchen, the veritable center of crime in all of New York, was at its most chaotic. Sporadic gunshots, cries, roars, and curses made outsiders shy away from this neighborhood. Even the bravest detectives were unwilling to easily step into this den of iniquity at this hour. But even in this chaotic place, there was one area that was exceptionally quiet and peaceful. However, anyone with even a slight understanding of the inside story knew that the reason for this quiet and peace was not because it was a good place. On the contrary, this was the largest gangster stronghold in all of New York, and even the entire U.S. This place was the lair of Wilson Fisk, also known as Kingpin, the underworld magnate dubbed the Emperor of the Underworld, in the U.S. Fisk Tower. Just hearing this string of titles, one would know what kind of perilous place this was. Not to mention what kind of armed defensive forces were hidden inside the tower. Just the security personnel at the entrance, with their bulging waistbands clearly indicating they carried lethal weapons, were enough to deter most ill-intentioned individuals. But evidently, not everyone would fear the power of this underworld emperor. Rosen, clad in black and masked, stood quietly in the shadows across from the building, seemingly waiting for something. The guards at the entrance, however, were completely unable to detect his presence. About 10 minutes later, a convoy consisting of one box truck and two cars, one in front and one behind, stopped at the building's entrance. Immediately, one by one, briefcases were unloaded from the truck and loaded onto freight carts inside the building, with the help of the convoy and the tower's armed security personnel. Watching those briefcases, Rosen's eyes burned with desire. Because he knew these boxes contained nothing but stacks of green dollars. This money was the tribute from Kingpin's various factions. As members of the underworld, most of the money earned was naturally black money, which could not be deposited in banks or used for legitimate financial activities before being laundered. After all, using black money to investigate and pinpoint criminal evidence is one of the most common methods used by countries around the world. And money laundering is a very time-consuming process. Therefore, without being laundered, most of the black money was either kept by criminal organizations themselves or continued to be used for criminal activities. This led to many instances where, when people saw news of a criminal organization, or even just individual criminals, being busted, there would be scenes of massive amounts of cash being seized. From a few million to hundreds of millions, and sometimes even billions. Among the more representative groups were those who sold flour, a euphemism for drugs. And the Fisk Group, as the largest criminal organization in the U.S., was no exception. As a comprehensive criminal enterprise, its various illicit businesses generated massive amounts of cash daily. To store this cash, the Fisk Group also had one or more underground vaults or money houses in major cities. And Fisk Tower, as the group's headquarters, also boasted the largest underground vault in all of New York. Over the years, heaven knew how much money was stored in that vault. Rosen was quite eager about this. As soon as all the goods were unloaded, Rosen didn't hesitate. A dark light flashed on his body, and he vanished from his original spot. When he reappeared, he was already in an unmanned surveillance blind spot on the second basement level of the building. Putting away a palm-sized mechanical mouse from the ground, Rosen stood still, and the next second, his figure disappeared again, just as it had at the entrance. Skill Shadow Fade grants invisibility when standing still at night. This was why the building's guards couldn't detect him. As for his ability to instantly appear here from outside the entrance, it was called Blink, allowing instant teleportation within a 1,000-meter range, ignoring terrain, but requiring line of sight. Clearly, Rosen's current hidden location was on the second basement level of Fisk Tower, and under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have line of sight when outside the building. So he used a small gadget, the mechanical mouse he had put away. This seemingly ordinary little thing could provide Rosen with a god's eye view, within a 5-meter radius of its location. Rosen had placed this mechanical mouse in Fisk Tower in advance, without attracting anyone's attention. As long as he was within 1,000 meters, Rosen could use Blink to reach the location of the mechanical mouse. If it weren't for the vault's overly strict security, which even the mechanical mouse couldn't infiltrate, Rosen could have even teleported directly into the vault, saving him all this trouble. But it was almost the same now. Fisk Tower's vault was just a dozen meters around the corner from his current position. And because Rosen had entered via Blink, the money transporting team hadn't even reached the vault yet. So after waiting for a few more minutes, the money transporting team had just arrived at the second basement level via the elevator. After waiting for a long time, and after passing through various security disarms, the vault door finally opened. Rosen didn't hesitate, he revealed himself, and at the same time, a bottle of pink potion suddenly appeared in his hand, which he drank in one gulp. As he drank the potion, Rosen, who had just revealed himself, entered an invisible state once again. Only this time it wasn't shadow fade, that skill only allowed static invisibility and couldn't help him enter the vault silently. But this potion could, because its name was Invisibility Potion. Although it only lasted for 2 minutes, it was more than enough for Rosen. Calmly avoiding the supervising guards at the vault entrance and Kingpin's subordinates transporting the money, Rosen easily entered the vault. The vault's interior was enormous, filled to the brim with banknotes, gold, jewels, and various other valuables. Especially the mountain of banknotes, which left Rosen, who hadn't seen much money, incredibly shocked. This must be hundreds of millions, right? Rosen muttered to himself. But now was not the time for exclamations, as the invisibility potion's duration was short. Rosen quickly scanned the area, and couldn't help but frown slightly. Although it was inside the vault, the surveillance was still extremely tight, with not even a single blind spot. If he revealed himself, he would definitely be exposed on camera. But he had come all this way, there was no reason for him to return empty-handed. So he didn't hesitate and activated Shadow Fade again. This skill could perfectly connection with the invisibility potion, and switching between the two wouldn't expose him. About 10 minutes later, the money transporting team finished depositing the money and exited the vault. The vault door then slammed shut. Rosen wasn't in a hurry to act. After waiting quietly for a full half an hour, he finally cancelled Shadow Fade and revealed himself. And as he revealed himself, the internal alarm of Fisk Tower also blared. However, at this point, it would take at least 10 minutes for the building's internal security to disable the layers of vault protection and reopen the door. During this time, a circular weapon appeared in Rosen's hand, and as he swung it, accompanied by flashes of red light, it shot towards the monitors in every corner. The surveillance cameras inside the vault were almost instantly destroyed by Rosen. The outside could no longer observe the interior of the vault. Only then did Rosen turn his gaze to the mountain of banknotes. Haha, after this haul, most of my skills should be extractable, and I won't have to worry about not having money to buy items for a while. Rosen then began to frantically rake in the money, completely unconcerned that a large number of Kingpin's armed subordinates were rushing towards the exterior. After all, he was a man with a cheat. Rosen, male, 17 years old, Chinese American, was a high school graduate in New York whose grades were not ideal and who couldn't get into college. However, that was his identity a week ago. Now, Rosen's body has been occupied by a soul from an alternate Earth universe. This is commonly known as a transmigrator. At first, Rosen was very resistant to the idea of transmigration. This was because the world he transmigrated to was the Marvel Universe, a world with extraordinary powers and full of future dangers. He realized this clearly after transmigrating when he saw the flamboyant world's richest man and playboy appearing in the news every other day. Such a dangerous world was clearly not a suitable place to settle down. Rosen's original world had no supernatural abilities and was relatively peaceful, at least his country was very peaceful. So, for an ordinary person like him, who had lived in a peaceful environment since childhood, hadn't even killed a few chickens, and had a relatively happy life. Facing such a perilous new environment, it was naturally not so easy to accept. However, after Rosen discovered that along with him, a prophet-like memory of this world had also arrived. There was also a cheat system called the Warcraft hero system. Rosen then felt that things might not be so bad after all. Warcraft was a real-time strategy game that was once popular worldwide on the Earth Rosen was on before transmigration. He didn't know if it was because Rosen was playing this game before transmigrating. But Rosen did get a golden finger based on this game. The system's function was also very simple. It allowed Rosen to acquire hero skills and various items from the Reign of Chaos plus Frozen Throne versions of the game. Rosen was very satisfied with such a cheat. After all, the Blade Master's Gale Step, the Watcher's Blink, the Dreadlord's Sleep, and so on, any of these skills, placed in the real world, would be extraordinary abilities. And unlike in the game, Rosen didn't need to level up his character through combat to learn or upgrade skills, as heroes do in the game. Instead, he could simply obtain them by drawing prizes from the skill roulette provided by the system. Skill upgrades were also achieved in the same way, each draw meant one level. To upgrade a skill to its highest level, 3, he would need to draw that skill 3 times. However, the prize draw for skills did not include each hero's ultimate skill. To obtain a hero's ultimate skill, one needed to collect all 3 of that hero's basic skills and upgrade them all to level 3. Then, the hero's ultimate skill would be automatically activated. And upon activating the ultimate skill, he would gain the hero's full attribute, level 10, overlay. It could be said to be quite practical. What Rosen found rather regrettable was that the heroes provided by the system only included the heroes from the 4 major factions and neutral heroes in the game's official maps. It did not include maps created by third parties like Dota, Shanghai 3C, etc. Besides skills, the system also had a store. The store was divided into a regular store and a special store. In the regular store, one could purchase items from various racial shops and neutral shops in the game. For example, Life Potion, Mana Potion, Town Portal Scroll, and other regular consumables from the 4 major faction shops and neutral shops, with no quantity limit. The mechanical mouse Rosen used was a special product originally from the human faction shop in the game, purchased from the regular store. The special store refreshed once a week, each time featuring equipment from the game such as the Circlet of Nobility which adds attributes, or Boots of Speed, or summoning items like the Tome of Summoning which can summon Hellfire, or Dragon Eggs which can summon dragons. It might even refresh with artifacts. For example, the first time Rosen activated the system, a divine artifact appeared in the treasure shop. It was the famous Skull of Gul'dan from the Warcraft world. The skull of the most powerful orc warlock Gul'dan, thoroughly infused with demonic power after his death. And it was the version before it was absorbed by the demon hunter Illidan. According to the description provided by the system, if Rosen obtained this item, he could immediately become a powerful demon warlock. It could be said that with the power of the system, Rosen could completely forego eating beef. Well, it's still too early to say he could forego eating beef. After all, this is the Marvel Universe, and while the abilities of Warcraft heroes are miraculous, they are still a bit insufficient compared to the truly high-level and even top-tier combat power in this world. But with this system, Rosen would at least not be helpless when facing supernatural powers. However, the system's items were not free. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a shop, but a warehouse. Whether it was drawing prizes or items, Rosen needed to pay for them. Yes, the system didn't require soul points, mission points, or similar things found in some novels Rosen had read in his previous life. It was very simple and crude. It wanted money. It wanted dollars. Massive amounts of dollars. And they had to be cash. Cash that had circulated in the market. Newly printed or privately printed counterfeit money wouldn't work. The skill roulette cost $10 million for one spin. A bottle of life potion cost $15,000. A bottle of mana potion cost $20,000. Even the cheapest mechanical pet cost $5,000. The prices of these items in the system were 100 times higher than in the game. Equipment was even more outrageous. A Circlet of Nobility with +2 to all attributes cost a staggering $180,000. That was 1,000 times more than in the game. As for the Skull of Gul'dan that appeared last week, its price reached $1 billion, a figure Rosen couldn't even imagine. It was incredibly expensive. But were such prices worth it? At least in Rosen's opinion, they were. Not to mention the extraordinary skills and treasures. Let's just talk about the life potion. In the game, its effect was to restore 250 health points. But in reality, its effect was to rapidly replenish vitality, quickly heal all non-fatal injuries and common illnesses, and prolong the life of critically ill patients. What's the difference between this effect and having an extra life? Is a price of $15,000 expensive? Rosen didn't think it was expensive. But unfortunately, Rosen had no money. Heaven help him, Rosen had struggled in society for over a decade in his previous life, and before transmigrating, his bank account only had 6 figures. After transmigrating, he was a poor high school student whose largest bill in his pocket was only $10. So, let alone a $10 million skill draw, Rosen couldn't even afford the cheapest mechanical pet in the system store at first. Fortunately, the system wasn't entirely heartless and provided Rosen with a novice gift package, a random hero template and a basic skill, along with an exclusive weapon. For Rosen, this was a godsend. What is a hero template? It means Rosen could directly gain all of that hero's basic attributes, level 1. What does that mean? For example, the template Rosen drew was for the original owner of the Blink skill, the Night Elf faction hero, the Watcher. Her basic attribute panel, level 1, was Strength, 18, Agility, 20, Intelligence, 15, Base Mana, 225. The numbers were consistent with the game, but the value definitions were slightly different from the game. After all, the real world doesn't have data like health points, defense points, or attack power. In the real world, strength represents pure physical power, resistance to damage, and recovery ability. Agility represents running speed and human reaction speed. Intelligence, in addition to representing a person's thinking and mental will, also affected mana capacity and mana recovery speed, just like in the game. And what were these values for ordinary humans on Earth? Intelligence was fine. After all, this was the main direction of human development. Although there were influences from race, education, and various other factors, the average level could still reach 6 to 7 points. However, in terms of strength and agility, the average value was only 3. Even for the soldier still hibernating in the North Pole, the system's estimated values were only strength 12, agility 15. This meant that after gaining the Watcher template, Rosen's physical qualities were equivalent to 1.5 Captain America's. And besides powerful physical qualities, the Watcher template gave Rosen an extra surprise. That was, as a night elf, the Watcher also had a racial talent, which was the ability Rosen used to conceal himself, Shadow Fade. Because this ability belonged to a racial talent, it was not classified among regular hero skills and normally could not be obtained through skill draws. It would only be activated after Rosen obtained all of a hero's skills and gained the attribute overlay. But now, having obtained the Watcher template, this talent was directly activated. With powerful physical qualities and divine skills like Blink and Shadow Fade, Rosen's initial annoyance and fear about transmigrating to the Marvel Universe instantly vanished. It should be known that Rosen transmigrated to the Marvel Universe in 2007, which was not yet the era when superheroes were everywhere. Even with just the Watcher's basic attributes, at this time, he was an overwhelming presence. Of course, as a transmigrator who knew the future direction of this world, Rosen would certainly not be satisfied with just the Watcher template and 1 or 2 skills. Before the age of superheroes arrived, getting enough money, drawing enough skills, covering enough hero attributes, and buying enough powerful items. Making himself strong enough to face all dangers was the way to go. But where to get enough money, and in cash? As an ordinary person in his previous life, the first thing Rosen thought of was the bank. However, this idea was immediately dismissed. Because robbing banks had too many drawbacks, and Rosen didn't want to go up against the state machinery so quickly. But Rosen quickly thought of a second plan, which was to rob criminals. And so, there was the current scene of Rosen raking in money inside the Fisk Tower. With the system's blessing, any cash Rosen touched could be directly absorbed into the system, turning into strings of numbers. Wherever Rosen went, all the banknotes in the vault vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, the number representing money on the system interface soared wildly. 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 300 million. Finally, as the last bundle of banknotes in the vault disappeared, the number on the system settled at 385,311,123. Of that, 382 million was what Rosen collected from this vault. A solid jackpot. The remaining 3,311,000 was the remainder of Rosen's previous haul from robbing other small gangs in New York. If not for that, he wouldn't have been able to afford the $5,000 mechanical mouse and the $10,000 invisibility potion. Besides the mechanical mouse and the invisibility potion, he also purchased a piece of equipment, the Orb of Fire from the Warcraft human shop, priced at 275,000. Because neither he nor the Watcher normally had long-range attack capabilities. But with the Orb of Fire, Rosen could perform fire attacks on targets within a 600-meter radius. This was also why the attack he used to destroy the cameras in the vault glowed red. Oh, the last $123 left was Rosen's original true asset, and it was because robbing several small gangs only yielded enough money for less than one skill draw. This was what led Rosen to set his sights on the behemoth that was the Kingpin Corporation. Facts proved Rosen's choice was correct. 380 million, let alone those small gangs, even most banks in New York might not have this level of cash reserves. After all, there are tens of thousands of banks in New York, and apart from a few main branches, most are just sub-branches or savings banks, making it impossible to store too much cash. However, for a behemoth like the Kingpin Corporation, 380 million wasn't that much. In fact, in Rosen's opinion, it was even a bit little. After all, in Rosen's previous world, the notorious drug trafficker Guzman's home was once found to contain over $200 million in cash. And according to Marvel's setting, Kingpin, as the leader of the world's #1 super criminal organization, his status was much higher than Guzman's. So, 380 million, for the Kingpin Corporation, really wasn't much. But Rosen was still very satisfied. This was enough for him to draw skills 38 times. And the heroes in the game Warcraft total only 24, 16 faction heroes, 8 neutral heroes. Each hero has 3 basic skills. With a bit of luck, he might even be able to draw all the basic skills for one hero 9 times and activate the ultimate skill. System, give me 38 skill compass draws. Without hesitation, Rosen chose to go all in with 380 million on the skill compass. Although treasures like the Skull of Gul'dan were very tempting, the price of 1 billion was still too expensive. Places like the Kingpin Corporation's vault, with its large amounts of cash, were also rare finds. Moreover, the Skull of Gul'dan was already from last week. This week's special shop did not feature treasures of that level, the best item was merely a treasure worth 10 million. Staff of Antonidas, Intelligence plus 30, increases spell power by 50%, comes with max level Radiance Aura, restores mana. A very good staff with excellent attributes. But for Rosen, who currently only possessed the Watcher template, it didn't offer much of a boost. Because the Watcher is an agile hero. Radiance Aura is good, but the Archmage among heroes also possesses this skill. As Rosen draws skills, it's inevitable that he will draw Radiance Aura in the future. And similar aura effects cannot stack. This means that this additional ability will inevitably be wasted in the future. More importantly, as a weapon, a staff's bonus attributes and skills only take effect when it is held in hand. Unlike skills, which can be cast however one wishes, as long as there's enough mana. So, for the current Rosen, it's far less beneficial than drawing an additional skill. As for saving money to wait for better equipment to appear in the future shop, that's even more unnecessary. Not to mention when it will appear next time, and with that time, drawing more useful skills earlier to strengthen himself might earn him even more money. If he's lucky enough, he might even collect all the skills of a hero. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Radiance Aura X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Water Elemental X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Divine Shield X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Flame Storm X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Bladestorm X3, upgraded to max level, will no longer be drawn. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Blink X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Shadow Strike X3, upgraded to max level, will no longer be drawn. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Searing Arrow X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Immolation X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Death Pact X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Carrion Swarm X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Carrion Beetles X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Gale Step X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill True Sight X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Forked Lightning X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Frostbolt X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Summon Grizzly X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Summon Warhawk X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Howl of Terror X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Drunken Haze X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Acid Bomb X1. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Pocket Factory X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Rocket Barrage X2. Congratulations, host, you have obtained skill Engineering Upgrade X2. As the skill compass interface began to spin, a series of dinging sounds echoed in Rosen's mind, and at the same time, information related to these skills continuously flooded his mind, leaving him with a headache and dizziness. Fortunately, with the Watcher template, his physical quality was already far superior to what it once was, and after a slight discomfort, he quickly adapted again. However, at this moment, Rosen was not in a hurry to study the new skills he had drawn. In fact, he didn't need to, as he was very familiar with these skills as an old Warcraft player. Even if the system had previously hinted that some skills' effects in the real world would change, their overall effects remained consistent. Instead, he continued to collect other items from the vault. As the vault of the US's largest gang, it naturally wouldn't just contain a few $100 million in cash, but also a large quantity of gold and jewelry. However, the system's recharge portal only recognized dollars. Even though gold is a global hard currency, it could not be directly counted into the system's funds. Fortunately, the system provided storage space, primarily for Rosen to store various equipment and items purchased from the system, but it could also be used to store items from the real world. It wasn't very large, though, only 4 cubic meters, 2 meters long and wide, and 1 meter high. It couldn't store many things, so emptying the entire vault was unrealistic. Therefore, Rosen mainly focused on picking up gold. After all, expensive jewelry had two obvious characteristics: cutting it would easily devalue it, and it was hard to sell. Gold was different. It was a hard currency, and once melted, no one could identify its source. Just as Rosen had barely filled the space, the vault door finally opened again. Seeing this, Rosen didn't hesitate and directly activated the Gale Step skill he had just drawn. Although with his current strength, even directly confronting the entire Kingpin Corporation would be no problem. But since he could do things easily, why should he waste his energy? He wasn't some bloodthirsty demon lord Tilda. And so, the security guards who rushed in with guns only felt a barely perceptible breeze pass by, leaving only a much emptier vault before them. We're doomed. The security personnel present felt a chill in their hearts. With such a huge blunder, Kingpin would absolutely not let them off. Gale Step, an Orc Blademaster skill in Warcraft, has a cooldown of 5 seconds and costs 75 mana. Effect: grants invisibility and increases movement speed by 10% for 20 seconds. In the game, there was an additional damage increase effect, but in the real world, this effect was removed. It's not surprising. After all, in the real world, there are no HP bars. If you strike a fatal blow, like a decapitation, anyone would die, so the extra damage wasn't very significant. Right, Thanos. However, even with only the 20-second invisibility effect, for Rosen, it was incredibly practical. At least he wouldn't have to buy invisibility potions anymore. After using invisibility to exit the vault, he found a blind spot in the surveillance, then used flash to leave the building. When he reappeared, he was already 800 meters away from Fisk Tower. The entire process took only a few seconds. Rosen put away the mechanical frog on the ground, which, like the previous mechanical mouse, was used as an eye, then activated Gale Step again and disappeared into the night. However, Rosen left contentedly, but the entire New York became even more boisterous. This was destined to be a sleepless night. Rosen's residence wasn't too far, located in a high-end apartment building in a wealthy area 1 block outside Hell's Kitchen. If it were him before transmigration, he naturally wouldn't be able to afford such a high-end apartment with a monthly rent of several $1,000s. But now that he had the system, he naturally didn't care about that money. It was also because he viewed Hell's Kitchen as an ATM that he specifically rented a place nearby. Since he used Flash when he left, he did the same when he returned home. So, in all the apartment's surveillance footage, he hadn't left his door at all tonight. Back home, he took off his night clothes, stored them in the system space, and Rosen excitedly threw himself onto the soft bed, then began to tally his gains, which were the skills he had drawn. Am I destined to be connected with the Watcher hero? And I'm only one level short of Flash to activate Vengeful God, isn't this a bit too frustrating? System, are you deliberately capping my level? After carefully tallying the drawn skills, Rosen was happy but also a bit annoyed. Among the drawn skills, the other two skills belonging to the Watcher, Fan of Knives and Shadow Strike, were both drawn 3 times, reaching max level directly, which Rosen hadn't expected at all. These were also his first 2 skills to reach max level, and even Flash was drawn once, making it 2 times. But he was only 1 level short of Flash, and then all of the Watcher's basic skills would be maxed out, allowing him to activate the ultimate skill, Vengeful God. In the game Warcraft, the Watcher hero had a low pick rate due to tactical adaptability and operational difficulty. But this didn't mean she wasn't strong. Especially her ultimate skill, which was a powerful tool in team fights. Vengeful God. You can summon a powerful god, and this god can continuously summon invisible souls, spirit of vengeance, from corpses on the battlefield to attack your enemies. This vengeful god is very powerful, immune to magic, and cannot be dispelled or controlled. And the spirit of vengeance it summons are even more abnormal, they are directly invincible. So, to counter this skill, one must use powerful physical attacks to focus fire on the vengeful god. But the problem is, the vengeful god's power is even greater than a level 10 the Watcher's main body. The only drawback, perhaps, is that the vengeful god can only exist for 3 minutes. But the problem is, the cooldown of the vengeful god skill is also 3 minutes. To narrowly miss such a powerful skill, it would be strange if Rosen wasn't disappointed. Phew, stay calm, it's only a matter of time. Rosen quickly adjusted his mindset, then continued to examine other skills. Besides the blink he already had, Rosen drew a total of 22 skills this time. It can be said that all of them were extremely practical. However, the skills Rosen valued most were these few. One was Gale Step, which he had already used. This skill, combined with invisibility and flash, meant there was basically no one on Earth who could catch him. Then there were Radiance Aura and Divine Shield, which Rosen had mentioned. As an agile hero, the Watcher's mana cap and mana regeneration rate were weaknesses compared to magic-based classes. Especially since more than 20 of the drawn skills were active skills that required mana consumption. With Rosen's current mana, so many skills couldn't be utilized effectively. It was like having a fast car but not enough fuel. In this case, Radiance Aura, a passive skill that could quickly restore mana, became very important. However, what also made Rosen quite regretful was that although he drew Radiance Aura this time, it was only level 1. A mere 0.75 mana regeneration per second was a bit insufficient. This made Rosen think of the Staff of Antonidas, worth 10 million that appeared in the mall this week. 30 intelligence represented a full 450 points of mana cap. The accompanying level 3 Radiance Aura had a mana regeneration rate of 2.25 per second. How many more skills could be used with that? Sure enough, he should have saved some money to buy that staff. It doesn't matter, there are still 3 days until the mall refreshes. Although it's hard to earn hundreds of millions in one go like tonight, tens of millions are still relatively easy. He just needed to work hard for the next few days. Once he had level 3 Radiance Aura, he would sell the staff to those guys at Kamar Taj. That's right, items produced by the system weren't just for Rosen, they could also be used by others. However, unless absolutely necessary, Rosen definitely wouldn't do that. Sure enough, everyone succumbs to the true fragrance law. Rosen shook his head and sighed. No, that's not right. Rosen couldn't help but recall the conversation between Doctor Strange and Wong in the original plot of Avengers 3. It seems the mages of Kamar Taj are quite poor. They probably couldn't afford the staff. So, was it truly the right path to fleece a certain world's richest man after all? And besides Radiance Aura, What Rosen valued most were the three skills: Divine Shield, Pocket Factory, and Engineering Upgrade. Like the Gale Step Rosen used before, these three skills also had slight changes compared to the game. Divine Shield goes without saying, it's invincibility. A life-saving divine skill. And its basic setting was largely the same as in the game. The only change was that the skill had an added note at the end, only effective against attacks below single universe level. Regarding this, Rosen was both happy and worried. Being able to defend against attacks below single universe level meant that even if Thanos snapped his fingers, he wouldn't be afraid. Because, under normal circumstances, the Infinity Gauntlet with all the gems assembled is only single universe level. The worry was that this skill also had a limit. And in the vast Marvel universe, there are many powerhouses at the multi-universe level. For example, a certain seemingly weak Dark Dimension Lord is a typical multi-universe level entity. No matter what, as long as I don't court death, I won't have to worry about any multiverse level guys for at least a decade or so. So this invincibility is enough. Dormammu and the like are Kamar Taj's business, Rosen muttered to himself after recalling the Marvel series plot in his mind. He then shifted his attention to the Pocket Factory and Engineering Upgrade skills. These two skills, along with another skill, Rocket Barrage, are all abilities of the neutral hero, Goblin Tinkerer, from the game. In the game, the effects of these three skills are quite simple. Pocket Factory generates a factory that automatically produces clockwork goblins. Clockwork goblins explode upon death, dealing damage to nearby targets, and have a duration of 45 seconds. To put it simply, they are self-destructing robots. Rocket Barrage launches rockets to attack a target area, stunning enemies within that area for 1 second. Engineering Upgrade is a passive skill that amplifies the Tinkerer's other skills and himself, such as increasing Rocket Barrage's range, speeding up Pocket Factory's production, and boosting his attack and movement speed. But now, these skills have undergone tremendous changes. Even greater changes than any other skill Rosen had drawn. Firstly, both Pocket Factory and Rocket Barrage now have two skill forms. The normal form is when Rosen prepares nothing and uses the skill directly. In that case, their effects and costs are not much different from the game. But the second form is different. Pocket Factory, true form. If you prepare enough materials beforehand, then Pocket Factory will become a true factory, in every sense of the word. You can manufacture any engineering product you know how to make inside, including clockwork goblins, with no time limit. No mana cost. This means that clockwork goblins produced under these circumstances, as long as they don't self-destruct, can exist indefinitely, not limited to just 45 seconds. The same applies to other engineering products. Rocket Barrage, true form. You can craft the rockets yourself, and their power will depend on the materials you use. No mana cost. This one is even simpler. It uses rockets crafted by Rosen himself to replace the mana-constructed rockets from the original skill. In other words, if Rosen could build a nuclear bomb, not only have the forms of the two skills changed, but their costs have also shifted from mana consumption to real material consumption. Of course, this doesn't mean that the true form is necessarily better than the original skill form. It just means each has its own advantages. But what surprised Rosen the most was the Engineering Upgrade skill. Engineering Upgrade, Level 2. You have learned Intermediate Goblin Engineering. As long as you have the materials, you can manufacture and repair any engineering product you can imagine. However, as a Goblin Apprentice, the engineering products you manufacture and repair may be unstable. You can change this through system technology learning. Goblin Engineering. Isn't this something that only appeared in a certain world, a game expansion based on Warcraft? Rosen concentrated his thoughts and realized that he indeed had a lot of mechanical knowledge in his mind. When he drew skills earlier, it was too rushed, the information in his mind was too chaotic, and his attention was mainly focused on the many skills. So he instinctively overlooked this point. But now, Rosen subconsciously looked at the bedside lamp. After observing it carefully, its structure and working principle quickly appeared in his mind. As long as he wanted to, he could easily replicate it with the corresponding materials, of course, only in terms of function, not appearance. And this is just a lamp. What about other things? Television, refrigerator, car, airplane, even an Iron Man suit. It's worth noting that Goblin Tinkerer's ultimate skill is called Mech Goblin. It's said to transform into a mech goblin, but in reality, the goblin body, which originally only carried 2 mechanical arms, transforms into piloting a powerful goblin mech. Good heavens. When he first transmigrated to this world, Rosen often thought about getting his hands on an Iron Man suit in the future. Now he's being told he can actually build one himself. This is just too wonderful. At this moment, Rosen's mind was already imagining himself piloting an engineering mech, clashing with Iron Man. Even when Tony Stark gets kidnapped next year and painstakingly hammers out the Mark I in a cave, he appears before him wearing a goblin engineering mech. Just thinking about it is exciting, Rosen thought, a smitten smile involuntarily appearing on his face. However, this means his future development direction might have to change. After his daydreaming, Rosen couldn't help but fall into thought again. Originally, after getting the system, the development path he set for himself was very simple. It was to treat all the dark forces in the world as ATMs, then draw skills to become a versatile and free ability user. He would get involved in various Marvel events if there were benefits, and stay out if there weren't. As for developing a faction, Rosen knew his limits, he wasn't cut out for it. But now, with the emergence of engineering, the situation is different. He could completely follow Tony Stark's example and make money by developing technology. While it might not be as lucrative as robbing gangs, it's stable and has a higher ceiling. And Goblin Tinkerer's skills provided Rosen with engineering, so what about the alchemist? Rosen wouldn't forget this neutral goblin hero, who is of the same race as the Tinkerer. Moreover, he had also drawn the alchemist's skill acid spray. This skill, like the Tinkerer's skills, has also changed. In addition to its original spell form, Rosen also gained an alchemy recipe, allowing him to create a true form version of acid spray without consuming mana. It's just a pity that Rosen only drew this one skill from the alchemist, so he couldn't know the changes in its other skills. Furthermore, unlike the Tinkerer's engineering, which is a basic skill, the alchemist's alchemy is his ultimate skill, and obtaining it would be much more difficult than engineering. Because his mind was filled with all sorts of skill changes in his future development direction. Overly excited, Rosen couldn't sleep a wink all night. Fortunately, after acquiring the Watcher's template, with Rosen's physical fitness, he would still be full of energy even after several days without sleep. As soon as dawn broke, he washed up and prepared to go out. He was already impatient to test out engineering. Boom! With a deafening explosion, a dockside warehouse located on the Hudson River was instantly leveled to the ground. Such a huge commotion naturally led to the surrounding crowds frantically calling the police. In less than 5 minutes, the police, who were already busy due to the New York gang riots, arrived at the scene. However, facing a pile of rubble after the explosion, they couldn't find anything. Meanwhile, Rosen, the culprit, had already left the scene in a bit of a huff and walked into a coffee shop a few blocks away, ordering a cup of coffee and some bread. The recent explosion was not intentional, it was an accident during an engineering experiment. Since the day he acquired the skills, Rosen had been repeating the routine of robbing gangs at night and finding places and materials to try out engineering during the day. Yes, that's right, the cause of the New York gang riots was also him. The first to go crazy was undoubtedly Kingpin. After that night, Kingpin's gangs scoured the world trying to find the culprit, and since Rosen left almost no evidence, they could only focus on those who had recently sold large amounts of gold. After all, that night, Rosen not only emptied the cash from Kingpin's vault but also took a large amount of gold and a small quantity of jewelry. However, they were destined to fail because Rosen had no intention of selling large amounts of gold recently. Instead, to raise money to buy the staff of Antonidas, he had targeted several other gangs in New York multiple times. As a result, almost all the gangs in New York were involved in this riot. This caused great distress to the New York police and the city government. For this, the mayor of New York, the director of police, and the FBI jointly interviewed a group of gang bosses, including Kingpin, and obtained inside information. Only then did they learn that a mysterious master thief had appeared in New York, specifically targeting these gangs. Therefore, While warning these gangs, the New York authorities also issued a reward for clues across all of New York under the name of massive theft. Although there was suspicion of official gang collusion, the New York City government had no choice, as Rosen's actions, which led to the entire New York gang riot, had already caused extremely negative impacts on New York, the world's largest city. Even the White House had called the mayor's office directly. However, Rosen didn't care about any of this. Because his actions were very secretive, whether entering and exiting experimental sites or going on robberies. Along the way, it was either Gale step or blink, so no one or camera could capture his movements. His entire body was also tightly wrapped, ensuring no hair or fingerprints were left behind. Especially now that he had more skills, Rosen also liked to set fire to things whenever he had nothing to do. The 2-level flame storm from the human hero Blood Mage was enough to incinerate most things in this world. So now, Rosen's thoughts were not disturbed by external commotion, he remained immersed in the failed experiment he had just conducted. During his attempts these past days, he had tried to create various mechanical products. With the various mechanical knowledge provided by engineering, coupled with some of Rosen's own insights. Basically, he could try to build all kinds of common modern mechanical products. He even built a power armor, well, the kind that doesn't fly. Of course, due to the limitations of materials, equipment, and the style of Goblin engineering itself, the resulting creations had a very cyberpunk flavor, just like the Mark I built by Tony, lacking the aesthetic appeal of modern technology. However, they were all usable, and the effects were quite good, without the instability mentioned in the skill description. Until today, when he started trying to build an energy core. Just like Iron Man's arc reactor, the most important thing for Rosen to improve the quality of his mechanical products was the energy core. The power armor Rosen had previously tried to build used energy from an improved car battery, which could only sustain the power armor for about 10 minutes. Of course, Rosen could buy more advanced and lighter batteries for improvement, but it would probably only sustain normal operation for a few hours, let alone flying. Therefore, a sufficiently powerful energy core was crucial. And Rosen obviously didn't have arc reactor technology, even Tony Stark hadn't developed it yet. So he turned his thoughts to an energy product among the knowledge provided by Goblin engineering, the orichalcum energy core. To be precise, this thing was not originally an engineering product. Instead, it was a magic technology product. It was a product of collaborative research between the High Elves and Dalaran. The goblins learned it from who knows where. Arcane golems, magic street lamps, and magic brooms wandering the streets of Silvermoon City and Dalaran were all powered by this type of energy core. Its output power might not be as great as an arc reactor. But its advantage lay in its large storage capacity and the ability to be recharged at any time. Well, generally speaking, it needed to be recharged by a mage or another mana source. And Rosen had drawn many spell skills, so he was considered a half-baked mage. Although his focus was now on engineering, he hadn't delved deeply into magic. However, this simple recharging was still achievable. So, as long as this thing could be built, Rosen's desired engineering version of the Iron Man suit would no longer be a dream. But the result was that Rosen failed. The core energy went out of control. If Rosen hadn't seen the situation was wrong and immediately activated Divine Shield plus Flash to escape quickly, he would have lost at least half his life. And Rosen had a rough idea of the reason for the failure. That was the substandard materials. The original orichalcum energy core was made from a magic metal called thorium in the Warcraft world, which was transformed into orichalcum after being infused with magic. In the Marvel universe, such a metal obviously does not exist. And Rosen, after many experiments, had previously selected a metal called bismuth, which had the best magical conductivity and containment. This stuff was quite expensive, costing $5,000 per kilogram on the market. Initially, the energy core made from this metal performed quite stably. But as Rosen's input of mana reached a certain level, this thing directly collapsed. So if Rosen still wanted to continue his research, he had to find a better material. Thus, very quickly, Rosen, familiar with the secrets of this world, listed several options for himself. One was to purchase the equipment provided by the system store, melt it down, and see if he could find orichalcum. But the cost of doing so was too high. After all, disassembling and melting down those pieces of equipment was easy, but if it failed, then both the equipment and materials would be lost. The second was to look for vibranium, to see if this legendary metal in the Marvel Universe was also as effective in terms of magic. The third was to give up on creating an arcane energy core and go to Russia to find the Vanko father and son, to have them create a monkey version of the arc reactor. However, this option had too many unstable factors. Given the personalities of the Vanko father and son, it would be difficult to make them willingly work for him. Well, there was also a fourth option, which was to go and communicate with the mages of Kamar Taj, to see if they had suitable materials. But for Rosen, this was also not a good choice. As a transmigrator, Rosen believed that the Ancient One, who normally only cared about the safety of the Earth dimension, would not deliberately come to bother him. But if he went to her himself, that would be another matter entirely. So, it seemed finding vibranium was still the most suitable, Rosen pondered while munching on his bread. Rosen. Just then, a clear female voice sounded beside him. You are, Jessica. Rosen turned his head and saw his former high school classmate, Jessica Campbell. Yes, it's me. Looks like I'm not completely forgotten. The girl smiled and nodded. Of course not, I'm so glad to see you safe and sound. Rosen displayed a hint of surprise at just the right moment. He had been wondering when he would have time to inquire about her situation, and he didn't expect to run into her now. Jessica Campbell, Rosen's former high school classmate. However, unlike Rosen, who had now successfully graduated, Jessica, back in her sophomore year U.S. high schools or 4-year, grades 9 to 12, which was 10th grade, had been in a car accident during a family outing. Except for her, no one else in her family survived. Even she herself fell into a long-term coma. It was said that she was very likely to become a vegetable. All of this was information the original Rosen had heard from his classmates. And from that time on, he had never heard any news about Jessica again. However, the current Rosen, who had transmigrated, quickly connected this classmate's experience with a future street-level superhero in the Marvel Universe, the Nitress, Jewel Jessica Jones, after integrating his original body's memories. There was just one problem. Whether it was the image of Jessica standing in front of Rosen now, or the news and various posters of Tony Stark he had seen before, everything told Rosen that this should be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But if Rosen remembered correctly, Jessica Jones in the cinematic universe had the surname Jones, and not Campbell, as in the comics. Regarding this, Rosen could only guess that the universe he was in might not be Earth 199999, but a similar parallel universe. After all, there are too many Marvel parallel universes. Even the so-called sacred timeline might not be just one. Because in Rosen's previous life, Marvel officially numbered the film universe as Earth 199999. However, in Deadpool and Wolverine, the sacred timeline was listed as Universe 616. Rosen's understanding of this was that Earth 199999 should be the sacred timeline, when Loki did not go to the Time Variance Authority. After all, anyone who has seen the movie knows that the Loki of that universe was indeed crushed to death by Thanos. And Universe 616 is the sacred timeline, after the Avengers changed history, allowing Loki to escape death, go to the Time Variance Authority, and become the god of stories. It is a brand new Universe 616, different from the original film universe and comics. Both worlds can be considered the main universe, and the Avengers' experiences are also no different. The only difference is the variable of Loki. And now, since this universe that Rosen is in has him, a transmigrator, it's not surprising that it differs from the original film universe. He just doesn't know if Jessica's mother in this world, Elisa, is still alive, just like in the cinematic universe. It seems you've heard about what happened to me. I'm pretty lucky, at least I don't have to lie in a hospital bed forever. The only problem might be that I'll graduate a year later than you. Hearing Rosen's words, Jessica gave a self-deprecating smile and said, That's not bad either. At least you still have a chance to go to college, and I don't anymore. Rosen didn't continue to bring up Jessica's misfortune, but instead, he also made a self-deprecating remark. Of course, it was the original Rosen who truly couldn't get into college. According to the memories in his mind, he was a genuine academic slacker, a waste of an Asian brain. However, the current Rosen had no intention of changing that. While speaking, Rosen was also observing Jessica. Although she had suffered misfortune, she was still quite lively, and he didn't detect any sense of decadence. It seemed that this girl had not yet encountered the destined calamity. Didn't get any college offers. That's their loss. I believe you'll have a good life without going to college, and actually, I don't plan on going to college either. Jessica, in turn, comforted Rosen and then said, "Oh, why? I remember your grades were quite good." Rosen asked. In the original body's memories, Jessica's grades were quite good. While not top tier, she was in the first echelon. However, he vaguely remembered that Jessica Jones didn't seem to have attended college. But Rosen thought that was due to the incident Jessica encountered later. "Hey, it's that car accident. The doctor said that I might have stimulated a nerve when I was injured, so my emotions are always a bit unstable now and I need to keep taking medication. My grades are only average, and getting a scholarship is impossible. And I'm currently adopted. Although my adoptive family is well off, you know how much college costs. While they're pretty good to me, I don't think they'll cover such a huge expense for me, and I don't want to be burdened with so many loans. It's better to start working earlier." Jessica explained briefly, "Oh, and I'm called Jessica Jones now. Jones is the surname of my adoptive family." Indeed, things had changed. Jessica was not adopted by the Walkers, as in the series. Instead, it was the Jones family, just like in the comics. And as for Jessica's concern about tuition fees, Rosen understood. Attending college in the United States is an absolute huge burden for ordinary families. Even public universities supported by government funds cost around $20,000 a year for tuition alone. If you include various miscellaneous fees like accommodation, textbooks, and insurance, it basically goes up to $40,000 or $50,000. Private schools are even more exaggerated. The total cost can directly reach $100,000. So, in the United States, unless a family is wealthy or a student can receive a full scholarship during their time at school, they will almost certainly be burdened with heavy student loans after graduation. Many people haven't even paid off their student loans decades after graduating. Even before Rosen transmigrated, student loans in the United States had surpassed car loans and credit card loans, becoming the second largest debt after mortgages, with a scale exceeding $1.3 trillion, which is quite terrifying. So, if Jessica was truly unable to get a scholarship, then not attending college might indeed be better. However, Jessica said her emotions were unstable. Rosen guessed it was probably a side effect of the gene serum. Whether in the comics or the series, Jessica's superpowers came from the other party in that car accident, a military vehicle loaded with chemical agents. Although there was no detailed description of that chemical agent, Rosen felt that since it was related to the military, that stuff was very likely related to the super soldier serum. After all, in the Marvel Universe, since Captain America, the US side has never stopped researching the super soldier serum. And it's not just a single department. The military, SHIELD, the CIA, the FBI, and many other agencies with independent authority all have their own research. Among them, the most representative are naturally the military led by General Ross and SHIELD. So, a military vehicle, and so on, made it hard for Rosen not to think of General Ross. Especially since the Hulk incident hadn't happened long ago. The Hulk incident did not refer to the Harlem Showdown against Abomination in The Incredible Hulk. Although in Rosen's original world, The Incredible Hulk movie was released in 2008, the same year as Iron Man. However, according to the official Marvel timeline Rosen had seen before he transmigrated, the time span of the Incredible Hulk movie was actually very long. For example, General Ross inviting Bronski, and his first confrontation with Hulk in South America, was in 2005. It was after that incident that Bronski, half dead from the beating, was injected by General Ross with an imperfect super soldier serum, allowing him to recover quickly. Coincidentally, Jessica's family car accident also happened in 2005. However, the Harlem Showdown between Hulk and Abomination took place in 2010. At the same time, Tony Stark, who had already become Iron Man, might have been worrying about his own life, or perhaps racing in Monaco. So, there was no intersection between the two. Of course, this was Rosen's speculation based on the development of the Marvel Universe. If viewed from the perspective of the movies in his previous life, it would be very simple. At that time, Marvel had not yet conceived of building a cinematic universe. The Hulk incident Rosen knew about was precisely the one in the movie where Bruce Banner returned to Culver University in the United States to find Betty Ross, and was then cornered by General Ross and his troops. It was also Bronski's second confrontation with Hulk after being injected with the super soldier serum. Of course, the outcome didn't change much. Bronski was once again beaten half to death. It was this time that Hulk truly appeared before the US public. As for Hulk's escape from the lab, because the military lab was relatively remote, the impact was not very significant. Hulk 1 is not listed as part of the Marvel series. Hulk's origin is based on the opening sequence of The Incredible Hulk. But this time, it was on a university campus. So, the commotion was huge. Even though the military tried their best to cover it up afterwards, Hulk's existence was still spread. There are still many related videos on the internet. Of course, in this era where superheroes have not yet appeared, unless it's a transmigrator like Rosen, most ordinary people in this world who watch the videos would just assume they are special effects composites. Didn't the military compensate you for that car accident back then? Connecting these thoughts, Rosen couldn't help but ask Jessica. What compensation? According to the police's determination, that car accident was my father's fault, so there was no compensation at all. Even the medical expenses for the 6 months I spent in the hospital bed were paid from my parents' inheritance. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have to worry about the cost of college. Jessica sighed upon hearing this. Just like college, medical expenses in the United States are equally terrifying. Her original family was a solid middle-class family, and her parents' incomes were quite good. If things had gone according to the original plan, even if Jessica's parents had died, she should have had a substantial inheritance. But the problem lay in the determination of that car accident. The responsibility was placed on Jessica's father, who was driving. This resulted in Jessica not receiving a single penny in compensation. Moreover, Jessica was bedridden for a full half-year afterwards. Although as a high school student still in compulsory education, Jessica could receive many medical expense reductions. But U.S. medical expenses are truly outrageous. Even with reductions, they basically exhausted her parents' inheritance. Are you sure that car accident was your father's responsibility? Rosen asked back, feigning contemplation. Actually, I'm not too sure. My memory of that day's situation is already a bit blurry. Jessica replied, a hint of guilt in her voice. Why the guilt? Because before the car accident that day, she was playing with her younger brother in the car, which to some extent did distract her father who was driving. It was also due to this reason that she did not question the police's determination of responsibility. She even felt guilty, believing that the tragedy was entirely her fault. I, on the other hand, think that matter isn't so simple. Rosen could more or less guess Jessica's thoughts, but that didn't stop him from trying to mislead her. That's right, no matter what the truth of that matter really was. Rosen intended to use this incident to plant a seed of doubt in this young girl's mind, to strengthen the possibility of recruiting her in the future. Most transmigrators, especially those who transmigrate into a world they are familiar with, basically have a bit of a collecting habit and an urge to change the fate of the original characters. Rosen was naturally no exception. And Jessica Jones' abilities were also quite good. It's just that her original living environment and personal experiences led to this superhero being unable to reach too high a level. She could only be a street hero, mixing in with a third-rate superhero group like the Defenders. If it were the Defenders from the comics, it certainly wouldn't be considered a third-rate group. After all, in the comics, the Defenders was formed by top superheroes like Doctor Strange, Hulk, Aquaman, Namor, and Silver Surfer, so their status was not low. But in the cinematic universe, let's not even mention it. Now, with Rosen's existence, the situation was different. Do you know something? A hint of surprise flashed across Jessica's face as she asked. I do know some things, but I want to confirm one thing first, which is, after you woke up, did you notice any changes in yourself, like becoming very strong, or jumping very high, and so on? Rosen asked. Wait, how do you know all this? Hearing Rosen's words, Jessica was very surprised, then looked around, and only after confirming no one was listening did she continue to ask in a low voice. She had indeed already discovered the changes in her body, and had even developed the idea of becoming a superhero. But she had never told anyone about all of this. Let alone Rosen, this classmate she hadn't seen in 2 years. Do you know Captain America? Facing Jessica's question, Rosen did not answer directly, but asked back. Isn't that obvious? Who in the whole world doesn't know Captain America? Wait, do you mean my abilities are like Captain America's? Jessica's eyes widened. More or less, but there should be differences. The super soldier serum Captain America used has long been out of print, but the military has never given up on super soldier research. So I speculate that at the time of that car accident, what was being transported in that military vehicle was a type of super soldier serum developed by the military. And this is also the reason your body changed, and even the emotional instability you mentioned might not be due to nerve stimulation. Rosen explained. Is everything you said true? Do you have any evidence? After listening to Rosen's account, Jessica was very shocked, and only asked after a long silence. Jessica, I think you must understand one thing. Facing Jessica's shocked questions, Rosen had no intention of revealing more secrets to her. What? Jessica asked, puzzled. Everything I just said was merely advice and a reminder given to you based on our friendship as classmates, not to prove anything to you, Rosen said seriously. Therefore, I will not provide you with any evidence you might want, nor do I have that obligation. Even the words I just spoke to you, I will deny ever saying them once I leave this place. If you want to know the truth of everything, you can only rely on yourself to uncover it. Rosen, though interested in recruiting future superhero prospects like Jessica, did not intend to be her babysitter. Simple giving would only fuel her greed, making her take things for granted and lose gratitude. Moreover, what Rosen needed were capable individuals who could stand on their own, not a mere vase or a burden. So, regarding Jessica's situation, Rosen would only give her a hint and a direction for investigation. This could also be considered a test. Only if she passed would Rosen truly consider recruiting her. Of course, whether out of his relationship as a decent classmate to her original self, or his own likes and dislikes, Rosen would still lend a hand if Jessica Jones were to encounter that dark experience in the future. After all, a scumbag like Purple Man deserved to die. Of course, this was also because Purple Man's abilities posed no threat to Rosen whatsoever. A 15-second divine shield was more than enough time for Rosen to kill him dozens of times over. I understand, thank you for the reminder, Rosen. Affected by the chemical agent back then, Jessica was only mentally unstable, irritable, and prone to anger, but she wasn't foolish. Moreover, her life under others' care since her recovery had made her more mature than her peers. She didn't possess the irrationality of some women. She quickly understood that Rosen didn't want to get involved in this matter. Of course, her understanding and Rosen's thoughts were certainly different. In her view, Rosen simply didn't want to stir up trouble. After all, this matter involved not just ordinary gangs or wealthy individuals, but the largest armed violent organization on Earth, at least on the surface, the U.S. military. No one would want to invite trouble. So, she didn't feel any dissatisfaction due to Rosen's retreat, but sincerely thanked him. However, for her, it also strengthened her resolve to uncover the truth behind that accident years ago. So you've decided. Rosen understood her choice from her expression. Yes, I didn't know before, but now that I do, I must find out the truth. My parents and brother cannot have died in vain. A flicker of anger flashed in Jessica's eyes. After waking from her coma, she had always believed that the accident was caused by an argument between her and her brother, so she had carried immense pressure within her. Now, that pressure had transformed into suspicion and anger towards the military. Then I won't say anything more. Good luck. Rosen nodded. This Jessica was exactly what he wanted. Only after confronting the military would the young girl truly experience the darkness of the world. At that point, she would essentially have only two paths. Either she would succumb to reality and be absorbed by the military or an equivalent force like SHIELD. Or she would resist the military to the end, then be completely cornered, captured, or killed. If she chose the former, Rosen would stand by and watch. But once she chose the latter, that would be his time to appear. After learning a bit of the truth from Rosen, Jessica no longer had the good mood she initially felt upon seeing an old classmate. So, after exchanging contact information with Rosen, she hastily left. She needed to go back and think carefully about where to start her investigation. Perhaps the hospital that treated her and the police responsible for the case would be good starting points. And preoccupied, she was completely unaware that a gaze from high above had been following her. Skill. Summon Warhawk Level 1. Summons a Warhawk to attack enemies. Magic cost 35. A skill from the neutral hero Beastmaster. A Level 1 Warhawk has no attacking ability and can only be used for reconnaissance. However, its speed is extremely fast, exceeding the fastest flying peregrine falcon on Earth, 320 km per hour, to an astonishing 350 km per hour, comparable to helicopters and high-speed trains. It also possesses an extremely wide field of vision, reaching an astonishing 80 kilometers during the day, and even 40 kilometers at night. The eagle with the farthest vision on Earth can reach 36 kilometers. It should be reasonable for a magical creature like a Warhawk to double that, right? It also comes with a passive skill, True Sight, which can detect nearby invisible units within a range of 1600 meters. Even at level 3, the Warhawk can become invisible. As a summoned creature, Rosen can share its vision in real time. And unlike the Warhawk summoned in the game which only lasts for 70 seconds, in the real world, a summoned Warhawk can exist indefinitely as long as Rosen doesn't actively dismiss it or it isn't killed. It only requires Rosen to pay an additional 10 mana per hour. This extra mana cost, with Rosen now having level 1 Radiance Aura and having bought the Staff of Antonidas, is negligible as long as he isn't engaged in high-intensity combat. And not just the Warhawk, summoned grizzly bears, crypt lords carrion beetles, and archmages water elementals are also the same. With the Warhawk's help, Jessica's whereabouts would all be under Rosen's control. This way, Rosen wouldn't have to worry about not being able to find Jessica after she encountered Purple Man. The only regret might be that the Warhawk is relatively large, and a level 1 Warhawk cannot be invisible. Therefore, tracking Jessica's movements can only be limited to outdoors. Rosen just wanted to ensure Jessica's round-the-clock safety, nothing else. After arranging for the Warhawk to protect Jessica, Rosen calmly finished his bread and coffee, then leisurely left the cafe, preparing to continue his unfinished research, finding suitable alternative materials for the arcane core. At this moment, he had made his choice, which was to seek vibranium. However, his primary target was not Wakanda or the underwater kingdom of Talokan, which possess large amounts of raw vibranium. Currently, Rosen was too weak and isolated. Directly provoking these two hidden forces would not be a wise choice. So, his target was the British Museum. He could also sell some of the gold he had taken from Kingpin. New York was too closely watched these days, and Kingpin's reach didn't extend across the Atlantic Ocean. As for traveling all the way to Britain, what if Jessica encountered Purple Man or confronted the military and he couldn't rush back in time? Rosen wasn't worried at all. Because in the system shop, there was such a thing as a town portal scroll, and returning to New York would only take a matter of minutes. Although it cost a hefty $320,000 per scroll, Rosen, now quite wealthy, could afford this amount. For his journey to London, Rosen chose to stow away on a plane. Still the same old routine, Gale Step plus Blink plus Shadow Fade. He silently snuck into the cargo hold of a flight bound for London. For this, Rosen specifically chose a night flight, as Shadow Fade can only be used at night. Rosen's main objective in London was to steal something, specifically a treasure from the British Museum. And in his opinion, the best way to eliminate all suspicion afterwards was to have no entry record. Moreover, Rosen had his system space for food and drink, and his physical fitness was strong enough. He didn't have to worry about not being able to withstand the high-altitude environment. Even if the plane crashed, he could always use a town portal scroll to return directly to New York. So, a mere stowaway situation was no big deal. After more than 7 hours of flying, Rosen landed safely and once again left the airport without anyone knowing. Just like in New York, with Blink and Gale Step, Rosen didn't need any transportation. He reached the gates of the British Museum in just a few minutes. However, Rosen was not in a hurry to act. After all, it was already daytime. The item he wanted to steal was the vibranium farming tool from Benin, which the main villain Killmonger and Ulysses Klaue stole together in the movie Black Panther. In the movie, that thing was displayed in the West Africa Exhibition Hall, with guards constantly stationed around it. Rosen didn't want to cause too much of a commotion, so it would be better to act at night when no one was around. Furthermore, the plot time in Black Panther was 2016, a full 10 years from now, and Rosen couldn't be sure if the museum's layout was the same as it was then. So Rosen found an unmanned corner outside the museum, then took out 3 mechanical mice from his system space. Under his control, the 3 mechanical mice stealthily ran into the museum's premises. However, unlike the smooth infiltration of Fisk Tower, 2 of the mechanical mice were discovered shortly after entering the museum. Of course, this does not necessarily mean that the British Museum's security is tighter than Fisk Tower's. It's just that the museum itself focuses more on protecting its collections, so it also places great importance on factors like mice and insects that could potentially affect the exhibits. Moreover, in the museum's spacious, bright, and clean halls, it's very difficult for mice to hide their tracks. Whether it's visitors or security, they basically call for help immediately upon seeing a mouse. Fisk Industries, as a gangster lair and commercial building, generally only needs to guard against strangers. Security personnel, even if they see a mouse, may not bother with it, because that's the cleaning staff's job. The focus of security for both sides is very different. However, Rosen was not too surprised by this situation, and there was no anxious expression on his face. In the real world, mechanical mice don't move slowly like they do in games, they run even faster than real mice and are tireless. They are not that easy to catch. What's more, Rosen was controlling them through a God's eye view. So after a commotion, the 3 mice ran out of the museum unharmed. During this process, Rosen also used the mice's vision to basically figure out the layout of the exhibition hall and successfully pinpointed the location of that farming tool. Now he just needed to wait for nightfall to act. But it was still very early. Should he look around? Rosen hesitated. After all, he had stowed away, and if he wandered around too much, it would be difficult not to leave any traces. Forget it, I'll just bear with it and find a quiet place to rest for a while. Rosen sighed softly. However, just as he was about to leave, he noticed a somewhat familiar figure in the distance, walking towards the museum. Is that Cersei? Doesn't she work at the London Natural History Museum? What is she doing at the British Museum? Rosen recognized the figure at a glance as Cersei of the Eternal. But then he thought, the London Natural History Museum and the British Museum are both national museums, so it seemed normal for their staff to interact. Cersei's appearance, however, did give Rosen a reminder. Compared to Hydra, S.H.I.E.L.D., and the like, these Eternal and the Celestials behind them are actually the biggest unstable factors on Earth in the true sense. And unlike young people like Jessica, who are native to Earth, these guys who have lived for who knows how long, and are essentially robots, are basically impossible to subdue. If there was an opportunity, perhaps it would be better to eliminate them sooner. It's just that these guys have very comprehensive abilities, and the Celestials are behind them. With Rosen's current abilities, it would probably be very difficult to deal with them. However, according to the movie, only the leader Ajak and the alternate leader Cersei could truly contact Erisham the judge. Killing 1 or 2 of the others shouldn't be a problem, right? Anyway, many of these guys hadn't been in contact for hundreds of years. They only reunited when the emergence was approaching in the plot. Before that, a few fewer people shouldn't be a big issue. Especially a certain kneeling gay man. Before transmigrating, he really disgusted Rosen. So, while contemplating the feasibility of eliminating certain Eternal, Rosen quietly left the museum area, preparing to borrow a house nearby to rest. However, not long after, Rosen couldn't help but marvel that, as a transmigrator, he might truly have some luck on his side. Because while looking for a house, he met another acquaintance, Sharon Carter. That's right, it was Peggy Carter's niece, Agent 13 of S.H.I.E.L.D., who almost became Captain America's love interest in the original plot and even became a villain later on. Of course, all that was in the future. Rosen followed and observed her for a while, then determined that she probably hadn't joined S.H.I.E.L.D. yet. she was still just a college student, a bit naive. However, perhaps due to the influence of her super agent aunt, Peggy Carter, even though she was still a student, her vigilance was very high. She seemed to sense something was amiss and actually tried to lie in wait around a corner. If it weren't for Rosen's Gale step being truly unsolvable in terms of tracking, he might have been discovered by her. At this point, Rosen also became interested and followed Sharon Carter all the way to a small but quite exquisite manor. This can't be where Peggy Carter lives, can it? Looking at the distant manor gate, Rosen's interest grew even higher. Rosen's interest at this moment was not in Peggy Carter, the legendary female agent. After all, no matter how legendary she was, it was still limited to the realm of ordinary humans. In contrast, the old man who might exist in this manor, pretending to be an ordinary person, was what Rosen was focused on. After entering the manor, Rosen quickly followed Sharon Carter into the main building and then saw Peggy Carter, who was already very old, warming herself by the fire in the living room. It is October now. If it were in New York, people would generally still be wearing short-sleeved shirts on the streets. But in cold and damp London, due to the large temperature difference between day and night, heating is generally required in all seasons except July and August. Of course, this refers to private residences. If it is a school dormitory or other public places with central heating, the heating time will be a few months shorter. Moreover, an elderly agent like Peggy Carter has many old injuries and is more sensitive to the weather, so her need for warmth is naturally higher. However, as an old-fashioned Londoner, Peggy Carter does not particularly like central heating, preferring an open fire like a fireplace. Actually, if conditions allowed, Rosen, who grew up in the countryside in his previous life, also preferred a fire over central heating or air conditioning. Aunt Sharon greeted her affectionately and sat down next to Peggy Carter, linking her arm with hers. "Ah, it's little Sharon, what made you think of visiting your aunt today?" Peggy Carter asked with a gentle smile. "Oh, you know perfectly well, you promised me before that you would recommend me to SHIELD after I graduated, and now it's been almost half a year since I graduated," Sharon complained to her aunt, feigning a childish demeanor. "Alas, I really don't know why you were so determined to be an agent, but it's also my fault for telling you too many stories about agents back then," Peggy Carter said with a helpless smile in response to Sharon's complaint. "I just want to be like you and prove myself," Sharon said, gently shaking her aunt's arm and complimenting her with a smile. "All right, actually, even if you didn't come today, I would have to find you in a few days. Here, it's in the middle drawer, an admission letter to the SHIELD Academy personally signed by the current director of SHIELD, Nick Fury. You can report next month." Peggy Carter shook her head, pointing to a desk not far away. She had no way of dealing with this niece whose personality was quite similar to her own. "Thank you, Aunt." Hearing Peggy's words, Sharon excitedly jumped up, ran to the desk, opened the drawer, and found the admission letter signed by Nick Fury. "Now you have your wish, but you must remember my words. After joining SHIELD, observe carefully, learn well, but don't easily trust anyone except Nick Fury." Seeing Sharon's excitement, Peggy Carter was both helpless and very seriously admonishing. Why? Hearing Peggy's words, Sharon couldn't help but feel a little confused. "There's no why, you just need to remember one thing, doubting everything is an agent's most basic quality." Peggy Carter didn't explain much, just reiterated her warning. Sharon was still completely bewildered by Peggy Carter's admonition. However, Rosen, who was secretly eavesdropping in the corner, was deep in thought. Peggy Carter's words clearly indicated that she knew SHIELD was not clean inside. This was not surprising, after all, she was a legendary agent and one of SHIELD's founders. In the past few decades of controlling SHIELD, Peggy Carter had not fought Hydra any less. Especially when she almost uncovered the organization Hydra used to conceal its identity, the Athletic Social Club. So, theoretically, she and Howard Stark, also a co-founder of SHIELD, should have known that Hydra was never completely eradicated. But the strangeness also lies in this point. Given Peggy Carter's original righteous and hateful personality, since she knew SHIELD was not clean, then why could she retire with peace of mind and stand by? For the current SHIELD, Peggy Carter only had simple precautions, but no intention of interfering. This was not normal at all. While being wary of S.H.I.E.L.D., she specifically emphasized that director Nick Fury was trustworthy. In Rosen's impression of the Marvel Universe cinematic world, Peggy Carter and Nick Fury, two S.H.I.E.L.D. directors from different eras, did not have much interaction. Although both were directors, there were at least 2 or 3 in between them. Especially from the Avengers plot, it can be seen from the conversation between Nick Fury and Alexander Pierce that Nick Fury was entirely promoted by Alexander Pierce and had little to do with Peggy Carter. If that's the case, why did Peggy Carter trust Nick Fury so much? However, if the old man Rosen was thinking of truly existed, then it made sense. That's right, the old man Rosen was thinking of was Captain America, Steve Rogers, who, after the Avengers Endgame, believed he had completed his mission, quietly went back to the past, and lived happily ever after with Peggy Carter. Only Captain America, who had fought alongside Nick Fury for more than a decade, could place such a high degree of trust in Nick Fury, the blackballed egg. If that were truly the case, Rosen could only say that Steve Rogers retired too early and hadn't been tricked enough by the blackballed egg. If he had the chance, Rosen felt he should tell him about the existence of the Skrulls and Wanda's future encounters. Compared to the Skrulls, what is Hydra? If the bald egg can be trusted, then pigs can fly. Thinking of this, Rosen stopped listening to the private conversation between the Carter aunt and niece, and instead activated Gale Step again, searching the manor. And with this search, Rosen quickly discovered something amiss about the manor. As the residence of Peggy Carter, a founder and retired director of S.H.I.E.L.D. This manor, apart from some basic servants, surprisingly lacked many security measures. This was clearly unreasonable. After all, Peggy Carter's department was not some ordinary government department. It was S.H.I.E.L.D., the most secretive organization in the world. Was Peggy Carter really not afraid that someone would target her, the former director, to obtain S.H.I.E.L.D. secrets? So, eliminating all impossibilities, there was only one possibility left. That is, Peggy Carter had enough confidence in her own safety. And the source of this confidence. Rosen's footsteps eventually stopped behind an old gardener in the yard, who was wearing a hat, dressed simply, and tending to the flowers and plants. Almost simultaneously, the old gardener seemed to sense something, raised his head, and vigilantly looked in Rosen's direction. Although it was an old, gaunt face, his eyes were bright and piercing, and his posture beneath his loose robes was like a tiger poised to strike. Even though his appearance had changed significantly due to age, Rosen still immediately recognized that the person was none other than the representative figure of Marvel heroes, Captain America Steve Rogers. Who's there? Although already incredibly old, as a superhero who once saved the world, the elderly Steve Rogers' senses were still extraordinarily sharp. Rosen was very surprised by this. After all, at this moment, he was in a Gale Step state. And this skill, in fact, is not just about the superficial invisibility and acceleration. Through Rosen's use and experience over this period, he has discovered that this skill, to some extent, also represents a certain degree of control over wind. Gale Step, wind walk, whether in Chinese or English, the word wind is not used incorrectly at all. While invisible and accelerating, the wind around Rosen would also envelop him, preventing his aura from leaking out. Even his movement and standing were slightly airborne. If it weren't for the extremely short distance of being airborne, less than a centimeter, which is imperceptible to the naked eye, he could even be said to be flying. Therefore, there was no sound at all during the process of moving with Gale Step. But even so, Steve Rogers still discovered Rosen's presence. This was different from Sharon Carter earlier. Sharon Carter's reaction was purely intuition, suspecting someone was following her. But in reality, Rosen was practically face to face with her while using Gale Step, yet she couldn't detect Rosen's location. After waiting to confirm, she only thought she was being paranoid. And the Steve Rogers in front of him. Rosen could be certain that the other party had genuinely confirmed his existence and location. After a moment of thought, Rosen deactivated Gale Step. Immediately, Steve Rogers saw a person wearing a black robe and a skull mask on his face, appearing out of thin air on the lawn. Because he was in London to steal things, Rosen, just like he did at Fisk Tower, was dressed in black. However, his original face mask had now been replaced with a skull mask. This was not an ordinary mask. Its name was Death Mask. It was a special piece of equipment that had just been refreshed in the special mall this week. The price was an astonishing 30 million. Its effect in the game was to provide 50% attack damage lifesteal. It was a fairly powerful late-game item. When Rosen first saw this mask, he was actually a bit disappointed. Because compared to the Death Mask, he actually wanted another item that could restore mana, the Artist's Mask. After all, he had so many skills now, and all of them consumed mana. And as an agile hero, the Watcher's mana cap was also slightly lower. So even though Rosen had already bought the Staff of Anthony, which had a level 3 Radiance aura and added 30 points of intelligence, Rosen still felt that he didn't have enough mana. After all, as a former World War II person in his previous life, the insufficient firepower phobia was ingrained in his bones. And mana, for Rosen now, was like bullets in a gun, the more, the better. There was no such thing as having enough. It was only after Rosen carefully read the effects of the Death Mask. He was completely won over. Because in the real world, there is no concept of attack power, or quantified attack power. Except for a small number of special individuals with strong vitality, most are just ordinary living beings. A single strike to a vital point would kill them instantly. Even Thanos, if beheaded with one strike, would be the same. So there was no such thing as health points equivalent to attack power for you to convert. Therefore, the effect of this Death Mask, which was refreshed from the mall, also underwent a huge change. Death Mask can draw half of the life force of enemies killed by the wearer to heal your injuries or extend your lifespan. The stronger the enemy, the more life force can be obtained. Extend lifespan. Rosen was shocked when he saw this sentence. What is an artist's mask? Completely unfamiliar. The Death Mask is the GOAT. How many normal people can refuse the temptation of immortality? Although Rosen had already obtained the Watcher's panel, this panel did not include the long lifespan of the Elven race. So Rosen also could not refuse the temptation brought by the effect of the Death Mask. Nor did he think 30 million was expensive. So on the night the mall refreshed, Rosen, who had originally planned to rest for a day, excitedly raided several gang strongholds again, abandoned his original idea of saving money to continue drawing skills, and completely emptied his slightly replenished small treasury, buying the Death Mask. After all, skills could be drawn anytime with money, but if this equipment was missed this week, it was unknown when it would refresh again. However, after buying the Death Mask, Rosen calmed down again. Indeed, the temptation of longevity was very great. But the prerequisite was to kill, and without accident, it would be large-scale killing. For Rosen, who had barely killed a few chickens before crossing over, and although he had all sorts of thoughts about not eating beef after crossing over, had not actually started killing, this was clearly a huge psychological challenge. So far, this Death Mask, for Rosen, was still just an ornament used to conceal his identity. It hadn't truly been used for its intended purpose yet. Who are you? An Asgardian. A Kamar Taj sorcerer. Steve Rogers looked at the appearing Rosen, squinting his eyes and asking cautiously. As a battle-hardened individual from another timeline, Steve Rogers subconsciously categorized Rosen's sudden appearance as magic. And the places he was familiar with that possessed magic were Asgard and Kamar Taj. However, Steve Rogers racked his brain but couldn't connect the figure in front of him with any person or organization he had encountered on another timeline. Who I am is not important. I just want to see how Captain America, after my retirement, could calmly watch tragedy after tragedy unfold over the past few decades. Rosen said sarcastically, looking at the old man in front of him. Although he was a Marvel fan, Rosen actually didn't like the character of Captain America. But the reason was not, as some people on the internet in his previous life said, his selfishness in dealing with the Winter Soldier Bucky and going back to the past to live with Peggy Carter. Rosen didn't think Rogers was very selfish in these two matters. On the contrary, Rosen felt that in these two matters, Rogers was truly selfless. Regarding Bucky, although Rogers fought fiercely with his childhood friend and his comrade Tony Stark. But in Rosen's view, the reason Rogers did this was not really to protect Bucky at all costs. Rather, he stood more from a fair perspective, believing that Bucky was just a tool used in all the incidents, and therefore, all the blame should not be placed on Bucky. At the same time, he also didn't want Tony Stark to completely fall into hatred. Going back to the past, abandoning all glory, living anonymously with Peggy Carter as an ordinary person, was also not selfish, nor was it abandoning responsibility. Instead, it was hoping to return the world to normal. Because as a World War II hero, Captain America had already been elevated to a godlike status through decades of propaganda. After experiencing a series of events such as the Chitauri invasion, the Ultron incident, and the Thanos invasion, it is imaginable how terrifying Captain America's prestige, as the leader of the Avengers who saved the world multiple times, could become worldwide. If Tony Stark were still alive, the situation would be better, as he would divert some attention. But the problem was that Tony Stark was dead. In this situation, any insignificant word or deed of Captain America could be magnified countless times. Once he made a mistake, the impact would be immeasurable. He would also become a thorn in the side of the contemporary authorities. After all, for those in power, only dead heroes are good heroes. Rogers also understood this, which is why he chose to retreat while he was ahead, and not just because he wanted to be with Peggy Carter forever. Therefore, in Rosen's view, Steve Rogers was a truly selfless person with no dark side. But it was precisely because of this selflessness that Rosen couldn't like this hero. Because Rosen was just an ordinary person with selfish emotions. Steve Rogers' almost ruthless selflessness and rationality made Rosen instinctively uncomfortable. You know about me. It seems you're also a time traveler from the future. Then you should understand that if you arbitrarily change the course of history, it's possible to cause even greater disasters. One mistake we made almost brought disaster to the entire multiverse. I certainly don't want that to happen a second time. Rogers said, realizing from Rosen's words that the other party was probably not an Asgardian or a Kamar-Taj sorcerer, but very likely a fellow time traveler like him. The mistake he referred to was, of course, not the Avengers borrowing Infinity Stones from other timelines, but rather the final battle that resulted from accidentally bringing Thanos from 2014 to their timeline due to improper handling during that process. If they had failed that time, and Thanos from 2014 had obtained the Infinity Stones, not only would their own timeline have suffered, but the timelines from which they had borrowed the Infinity Stones would have been doomed as well. It was precisely because of this that Rogers had adhered to the principle of not interfering with the course of history during the decades he had spent in this timeline after arriving. As for his own time travel and prolonged stay, in a way, it was actually in line with history. Because it was the experience of time travel during the final battle that made him understand why he always felt a sense of incongruity when he saw an elderly Peggy Carter again after waking from the ice. She was clearly married, but Steve only ever saw photos of Peggy and their 2 children in her home. There was never any clue about the person she married. It was as if that person didn't exist at all. Steve had also interacted with the 2 children, but they remained tight-lipped about that person's existence, and their gazes towards him were strange. At first, Steve Rogers thought it might be the awkwardness of the younger generation not knowing how to face their mother's old flame. But when he traveled through time and met Carter, he discovered a clue. And after the final battle, when Captain America returned to 1970 to return the Infinity Stones, he learned a shocking secret during a face-to-face encounter with Peggy Carter. It turned out that he, Steve Rogers, had actually been by Peggy Carter's side continuously since 1945. Except that it was a different timeline's him. That's right, the point in time Captain America ultimately returned to was not actually 1970, but 1945. In fact, at first he did want to be with Peggy in 1970, but Peggy from that era told him that he should go back to 1945. Initially, I thought it was 1970 when the Infinity Stones were taken, but later I re-examined and realized it was incorrect. In the final dancing scene, the cars driving outside the house were clearly 1940s or 1950s style, and Peggy Carter was younger than she would have been in the 70s. I also checked online, and some say 1947 or 1956. Here, all said it is 1945. If it were an ordinary person, like Rosen, they might find such a situation, effectively, cuckolding oneself, unacceptable. But Steve Rogers accepted it very calmly. Because his love for Peggy Carter was, to some extent, equally selfless. As long as she was happy, that was all that mattered. He actually didn't care that much whether he was the one bringing her happiness. So he ultimately chose to stay in another timeline's 1945 and spend the rest of his life with Peggy Carter there. Not only was it not interfering with history, but it was actually an act of conforming to history. It's hard to judge. And Rosen was clearly unwilling to accept Steve Rogers' line of reasoning. But it could also become better, couldn't it? In your timeline, you eliminated Thanos from 2014, thereby saving that timeline's universe from Thanos' threat. Isn't that a good thing? Rosen retorted. You're working backward from the result. But what if we had failed back then? Child, in this world, the most terrifying thing is never knowing what will happen in the future, but not knowing what will happen. Steve Rogers shook his head and said. Although Rosen's voice was somewhat distorted because of the mask, Steve Rogers could still tell that the other party was not very old. And in fact, that was true. Not to mention that Rosen is only just turned 18 now, even adding his age before time travel, and not counting the time Captain America was frozen, he wouldn't even be half the age of the elderly Captain America. Captain America was born in 1918, was 27 when frozen in, 45, woke up in 2011, was 39 in the final battle in 2023, returned to 1945, and now in 2007, 62 years have passed. In other words, the Captain America standing in front of Rosen now has a biological age of 101, and after the final battle, he would be 124. While this biological age is somewhat exaggerated, it's not unreasonable. After all, the longest-lived ordinary person on record also lived to over 140 years old. Not to mention Captain America, who had been injected with the super soldier serum. And Rosen's 2 lives combined don't even add up to 50 years. Calling him a child is perfectly fine. My thoughts are exactly the opposite. I think knowing the tragedies that will happen in the future, yet lacking the courage to try and change them, that is the most sorrowful thing. In terms of life experience, Rosen naturally wasn't qualified to compare with Captain America. But as a time traveler, he also had his pride. I've time traveled, and I have a system. If I don't change history, wouldn't my time travel have been in vain? Of course, everyone has their own convictions. Only by going through it will you have no regrets. However, to Rosen's surprise, the elderly Captain America did not intend to dwell on this issue with him. Instead, he acknowledged Rosen's idea and then continued to tend to the flowers and plants in front of him. Is this ignoring me? No regrets. Haha, don't you want to know what happened to your teammates after you left? Rosen's eyes darted around, and he asked mockingly. What does knowing matter? What does not knowing matter? Everyone's path must be walked by themselves. Steve Rogers' movements paused slightly, then he said. Heh, someone didn't say that when he needed them. We may be imperfect, but we are definitely the most reliable. What a grand statement. But when your teammates needed help, where was the reliable you? Rosen snorted coldly. Steve Rogers didn't speak, continuing his actions as if Rosen wasn't talking about him. Poor Wanda, sacrificed so much for the world, but what was the result? Her lover's body was disassembled into a pile of parts, ultimately she could only descend into depravity. And Sharon Carter, the unlucky girl, owed a pile of favors and tricked into a kiss, but the other party never intended to repay it. Ultimately, under the pressure of the world, she could only hide in the shadow, barely getting by. Rosen continued to intensify the fire. And this time, Steve Rogers finally stopped his work. If your goal is to humiliate me, to make me regret, then you've won. I did wrong by them. But as an established fact, what's the point of you telling me? Do you still expect these old bones of mine to go to war again? Steve Rogers sighed. These young people nowadays really lack martial virtue, coming to make things difficult for him, an old man over 100 years old. Couldn't you go and say these things to him in 1945? Humiliation. You're overthinking it. You're not worth me making a special trip. I'm just passing by, taking a look, and verifying something, that's all, Rosen said. Then I think your purpose should be verified. I have nothing here, so I won't entertain you further. Steve Rogers sighed again upon hearing this, indicating that Rosen should leave. I will change everything. Rosen seemed not to hear the other party's dismissal. I wish you success. Steve Rogers said perfunctorily. Aren't you going to try and stop me? Rosen asked. This isn't my timeline to begin with. If there's really a problem, it's the responsibility of this timeline's Steve Rogers. I, an old man on the verge of death, won't get involved. Steve Rogers shook his head. Heh, is that so? I will start changing everything from your counterpart in this timeline. I hope you can still sit still then. Rosen snorted coldly, and then his figure disappeared from the spot. He had seen what he wanted to see, and said what he wanted to say, so there was no need to stay longer. After all, he was just an old man, no longer the spirited Captain America with the USS. He couldn't possibly really fight the other party, could he? Wouldn't that truly be bullying an old man? A verbal jab was enough. Just as you said, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it? Sensing Rosen's departure, Steve Rogers' face showed no anxiety whatsoever, but rather a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He, too, deep down, longed for change, didn't he? It was just that he couldn't be the one to do it. Perhaps the life of this timeline's Steve Rogers would be a bit happier than his own. Grant, who are you talking to? Just then, Peggy Carter, supported by Sharon Carter, walked out of the house, trembling slightly. Grant is Steve Rogers' middle name. However, this middle name had not been used since Rogers' mother passed away. Only Bucky, who grew up with him, and Peggy Carter, his lover, knew it worldwide. So, Rogers, after time traveling, used it as his name to the outside world. Nothing, I'm just getting old and tend to talk to myself. Hearing Peggy's call, Rogers stopped what he was doing, a gentle smile appearing on his face. However, as his gaze swept over Sharon Carter, remembering Rosen's words just now, a hint of unease flickered in his eyes. As Rosen said, if there was someone Steve Rogers owed, this girl was absolutely one he couldn't avoid. Of course, the current Sharon Carter couldn't possibly know all this. She also couldn't imagine that this familiar, unremarkable old man who had spent decades with her aunt was actually her idol, Captain America after all. She was born too late, the late life and illegitimate daughter of Peggy Carter's brother, Michael Carter. Michael Carter, originally thought to have been sacrificed in World War II, had not died. The mysterious man who killed the then director of the Strategic Scientific Reserve in the Agent Carter Season 2 finale was Michael Carter. Few people knew the specific experiences of Peggy Carter's twin brother. But it was certain that Sharon Carter's mother had not married Michael Carter and was also very young. This is also why Carter had a niece who was only 21 years old. So when Sharon Carter was born, Steve Rogers was already very old, so much so that she couldn't connect this familiar old man with the legendary Captain America. After leaving the residence of elderly Captain America and Peggy Carter, Rosen lost the mood to find a place to rest. Although he had been in the plane's cargo hold for over 7 hours, this fatigue was nothing to him now, and resting or not didn't make much difference. So Rosen simply wandered around London, hoping to sell some of the gold he had stolen from Kingpin earlier. The only problem was that he didn't want British pounds. Fortunately, although the official currency here was the British pound, as an important economic center and international metropolis in Europe, the US dollar was just as usable here. The government also did not restrict the circulation of the US dollar here. At the same time, Britain also had no restrictions on physical gold. Banks, pawn shops, exchange offices, jewelry stores, and other various institutions generally had gold purchasing services. The only problem was that Rosen, as a stowaway who didn't want to show his face, was not convenient to go to those large public places. So, using Gale Step, Rosen darted through the streets of London at an extremely fast speed. He quickly found a seemingly private exchange office in an alley. However, just over 10 minutes later, Rosen emerged with a displeased expression. The local gang members were truly too impolite. They actually saw Rosen alone and not wanting to show his face, and tried to rob him. Robbing him was one thing, but how come you don't even have a gun? What's the meaning of holding a few small daggers? They were practically looking down on him. Oh, I forgot, this is London, and guns are prohibited here. Rosen's choice was to angrily beat up a few people, then empty all the savings from this private exchange office. As a result, Rosen, who originally wanted to sell a portion of the gold, not only failed but also gained a lot of gold and various currencies in his system space. Actually, there was even more, but they were all worthless currencies from small countries, which Rosen didn't bother to take. He only picked out those with relatively high value and that were easy to sell. It was just that there were fewer US dollars, only a mere few 100,000. The most was British pounds, a total of over 3 million. After all, it was just a small private exchange office. Normally, they wouldn't have that much money. It was due to a client having made an appointment. If he hadn't only brought a portion of the gold this time, and they were all remelted gold bars instead of the originally space-consuming various gold ornaments, clearing out half of his system space, it would have been difficult to fit everything. Tisk, I originally wanted to suffer a bit as an ordinary person and do business with you properly, but you didn't seize the opportunity. Rosen left contentedly. He had just bought a death mask earlier, and his small vault was a bit depleted. Now it was somewhat replenished. And with such a start, Rosen's original thought of robbing, which had quieted down a bit due to leaving New York, began to stir again. Judging from the performance of that exchange office just now, it was clearly involved with the underworld. And as an international metropolis on par with New York, London certainly had no shortage of gangs. He might as well go for a big score. Of course, as an outsider, it would obviously not be easy for Rosen to find those gang strongholds. But places like this exchange office were much easier to find. As for the impact such actions would cause, he was going to steal from the British Museum. Why would he care about this? Thus, over the next day, many places under the London gangs, such as money changers, exchange offices, and pawn shops, suffered greatly. Of course, as a customer, Rosen was actually quite reasonable. His actions were not as simple and crude as they were in New York. Instead, he adopted a method of entrapment. That is, he would go to them to exchange gold for US dollars. If they harbored ill intentions, too bad, what was theirs became his. If they conducted the transaction honestly, Rosen naturally wouldn't bother them. And surprisingly, after a day of work, Rosen actually managed to exchange a lot of gold. And the amount of money in his system once again soared to over 10 million. However, his system space wasn't emptied much. The space freed up by the gold was already filled with various currencies totaling over 30 million British pounds. Surprisingly, Rosen's actions, for a long time in the future, made the London gangs much more disciplined in their financial dealings. This significantly improved their reputation in the global underworld market. As for the culprit for whom they offered a high reward, there was naturally no trace to be found. Late at night, accompanied by the piercing alarm of the British Museum, Rosen tore a teleportation scroll and returned to his apartment in New York 3 seconds later. And the next day, news of an ancient farming tool from Africa being stolen from the British Museum made it to world news. For most people, this news held no significance. It was more a source of amusement. After all, in their view, the British Museum preserved so many treasures that they had plundered from various countries around the world back then, so why would a thief steal a farming tool that was essentially worthless except for its historical research value? However, some discerning individuals noticed something different. The first was elderly Captain America. After all, during the Endgame, his cooperation with Wakanda was very deep, especially since Bucky had received several years of treatment in Wakanda. During the Avengers Civil War, he also stayed in Wakanda for a long time. So he had indeed heard Black Panther T'Challa mention the matter of Killmonger back then. Thus, he also knew about the existence of such a vibranium tool in the British Museum. And now seeing this news, although there was no evidence, his intuition told him that the person who did this was the mysterious young man who suddenly appeared yesterday. However, elderly Captain America didn't pay much attention after seeing it. Even if Earth were to be destroyed tomorrow, he would not come out of retirement. But compared to elderly Captain America, another person couldn't sit still. This person was T'Chaka, the current king of Wakanda and the father of the future Black Panther, T'Challa. Although Wakanda had always adopted a policy of isolation, as king, T'Chaka was still very concerned about international news. The moment he saw this news, he became alert. If the future Killmonger knew about the existence of this vibranium tool stored in the British Museum, how could T'Chaka, as the king of Wakanda, not know? After all, as king, he had visited Britain several times and toured the British Museum. He naturally recognized that this seemingly ordinary farming tool was actually a vibranium artifact. It was just that he didn't care. The British didn't know the true nature of this thing anyway. Leaving it there was fine. If he were to take it away, it would easily attract the attention of the British authorities, which would be detrimental to Wakanda's isolation policy. But the situation was different now. Someone stealing nothing else but this inconspicuous, farming tool, clearly recognized that it was vibranium. And in his understanding, besides the people of Wakanda, there was only one other person in this world who could distinguish vibranium. That was the arms dealer Ulysses Clow, who had committed blood debts in Wakanda. Wakanda had always been hunting this guy, but he was too cunning, and Wakanda's pursuits always ended with him escaping. This left T'Chaka very helpless. And now with new information, he naturally wouldn't let it go. Soon, he called his son, T'Challa, over. Although he appeared relatively late in the original plot, T'Challa was not young. Born in 1980, he was already 27 years old now, and had long been an excellent warrior. Good guy, vibranium really works. It seems I'll have to have a good talk with Wakanda or Talokan if I get the chance. 2 days later, in a dilapidated warehouse, Rosen smiled contentedly as he looked at the finished orichalcum energy core. After returning to New York from London, he re-immersed himself in the study of vibranium. And the whole process was surprisingly smooth. After all, as one of the hardest metals in the Marvel Universe, vibranium, in Rosen's impression, should be very difficult to reprocess. In the original plot, Wakanda was only able to process vibranium using unique ultrasonic frequencies. The specific frequency was not mentioned in the movie. For this, Rosen specially built an ultrasonic processing workbench, preparing to slowly experiment. For Rosen, who had mastered intermediate engineering, this was not too difficult, apart from taking a little more time. Of course, as a product of Goblin engineering, the precision of this ultrasonic workbench was not very high, but at least it was usable. However, before the ultrasonic processing workbench could even be used, he discovered that vibranium's resistance to magic did not seem to be as high as its physical resistance. Although it was quite laborious, under Rosen's continuous flushing with arcane mana, it did indeed soften. Of course, this softening was relative, it didn't turn into a liquid or semi-liquid. Its original hardness was simply weakened to the level of ordinary high-carbon steel. But this level of hardness was already enough for Rosen to reshape it. Having discovered this, Rosen also seemed to understand why Vision, despite having a vibranium body, appeared so weak when facing Corvus Glaive and Thanos. Could it be that he had been spending so much time with Wanda, the controller of chaos magic, that his body had been softened by chaos magic? It really seems to make sense. Otherwise, during the Civil War, why would Vision, an artificial intelligence, not only keep missing but also almost kill War Machine? Thinking of this, Rosen's expression grew even stranger. Indeed, a gentle embrace is a hero's grave. Even robots can't resist it. Jarvis, for your health, it's better if you don't become Vision in this world. Let me bear Scarlet Witch's heavy love for you. With a strange smile on his face, Rosen began to work diligently. And finally, 2 days later, he successfully completed the vibranium, turning it into an orichalcum energy core. No, it should be called a vibranium energy core, which is more appropriate. However, his happiness didn't last long. It's stable, but the conductivity and magic storage are too low, aren't they? About 10 minutes later, Rosen put down the energy core, his brows furrowed. The energy core made of vibranium was stable enough. But when Rosen injected mana into the energy core, he found that the injection speed was very slow, not even as fast as his recovery speed under a level 1 Radiance Aura. Intonidus's staff with a level 3 Radiance Aura and the prepared mana potions were completely unnecessary. Moreover, the mana storage capacity was not high. According to the energy consumption calculations of the engineering magic mecha he designed earlier, a single charge would only be enough for 4 hours of normal operation. If engaging in high-intensity combat, the time would be even shorter. And it's important to know that the engineering mecha he designed couldn't even fly. This level of energy supply is simply not enough. Rosen couldn't help but shake his head as he looked at the orichalcum energy core in front of him. It seems that vibranium is still not suitable as an energy core for the magic side. However, in the absence of a better alternative in the short term, he could only make do with it. Rosen sighed. But the next moment, he seemed to think of something and looked thoughtfully at the vibranium energy core. That's right, vibranium's magic storage performance isn't good, but its energy storage for physical energy like electricity is excellent. So, with a strange expression, Rosen brought over a power cable. Sure enough, vibranium is still vibranium. It doesn't work for the magic side, but it's great for the physical side. Looking at the almost off-the-charts energy reading displayed by the vibranium energy core after being charged with electricity, Rosen beamed. Although the magic energy core couldn't be used. But the rechargeable version of the energy core was just as good. It seems he still needs to communicate more with Wakanda and Talokan in the future. Hopefully, they will be sensible then. However, at this stage, he should first look for Ulysses Klaue. In Avengers 2, his factory was in a ship graveyard on the South African coast, but he didn't know the name, the salvage yard, in the movie, which means a junkyard. God knows why it was called the Salva Wharf. South Africa's coastline is quite long, so it might take some searching. Without his own forces, some things are really troublesome. Tisk, why do I suddenly feel like joining Hydra? As for joining S.H.I.E.L.D., is there any difference from joining Hydra? Of course, Rosen just thought about it. Although Hydra's power is vast, its authority is too decentralized. In Captain America 2 and Avengers 2, Hydra seemed to have been largely cleaned up. But in reality, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series made it very clear, Hydra was never completely eradicated. It would occasionally change its identity and cause trouble. The slogan it shouts, "Cut off one head, two more shall grow," is really not an exaggeration. The reason for this is that Hydra has never been a centralized organization. Controlling one or a few of its lines might be possible, but completely controlling it is too difficult. That's right, if Rosen were to join Hydra, he certainly wouldn't be a grunt, he would have to be the boss. But its leaders are too numerous, as difficult to clean up as an octopus, no wonder its symbol also looks like an octopus. Speaking of Hydra, Rosen couldn't help but think of the neutral monster, the Hydra, in the Warcraft game. If that thing could be summoned, it might really be used to trick and control the Hydra organization. It's just a pity that, in Rosen's impression, although there are many summoning items in the game, there doesn't seem to be one for summoning a Hydra. Rosen thought about various things as he began to pack up, preparing to leave the warehouse. Charging the energy core just now used up too much electricity, and he believed it wouldn't be long before the power company or the original owner of the warehouse came looking for him. So, he couldn't stay here any longer. However, he did indeed need a fixed base. But just as he was about to leave, his mind suddenly stirred, and a special vision appeared before Rosen. This is Black Panther and Black Widow. How did these two end up together? Although Rosen had already left London, he still planted his eyes there for future convenience. These eyes were, of course, the mechanical animals he bought from the system shop. Rosen now had a bit of a surplus, so he bought many mechanical animals. Not just London, but New York also had quite a few. These mechanical animals could exist indefinitely. Without Rosen's control, they would autonomously mimic the animals they transformed into and actively avoid humans. And whenever Rosen wished, he could access their vision. Not only that, but they would also serve as beacons for Rosen to travel all over the world in the future. Of course, the town portal scroll couldn't achieve this. Although there was no main city in the real world, and Rosen could freely set and change his town portal scroll location, only one town portal scroll location could exist at any given time. However, in Warcraft, there were also treasures like the Staff of Teleportation and the Archmage's ultimate ability, Mass Teleport. Both of these teleports allowed one to teleport to any location where an allied unit was present. Of course, in the game, this, any location, was limited to the map. In the real world, what limitations these two teleports had was unknown to Rosen for now, as he had not yet acquired them. When he asked the system, the reply was that Rosen would naturally know once he learned the skills or after them all refreshed. However, Rosen thought that the distance wouldn't be too short, it might even cover the entire planet. So, he also planned to place some mechanical animals whenever he had the opportunity to visit an unfamiliar place. As for expecting mechanical animals to migrate on their own, that was unrealistic. Short distances were fine, but long distances would be a disaster for these short-legged creatures. Moreover, mechanical animals had almost no offensive power and were relatively fragile. Once attacked, they could easily be damaged. Without Rosen's active control, hiding in a small area was fine, but long-distance travel was too prone to accidents. Therefore, at this stage, only New York and London had a considerable number of mechanical animals placed. And it was precisely these mechanical animals, placed as a precaution, that allowed Rosen to witness a battle that had not appeared in the original plot. Black Panther vs. Black Widow. Unlike the Black Widow in the movies, who mostly operated unmasked except for occasional disguises, the Black Widow in the footage was masked. Rosen thought this was actually normal. As an agent, unless performing a honey trap mission, there was no reason to show her face in all operations. After all, Black Widow's strength was far from enough to kill all witnesses every time she carried out a mission. Different disguises for different scenarios were quite necessary. Especially since Black Widows were basically all exceptionally beautiful women of various ethnicities. Otherwise, if there was even one survivor, wanted posters for Black Widows would be flying all over the world. Of course, Natasha Romanoff, who joined S.H.I.E.L.D. in the original plot, was a bit different. After all, she had S.H.I.E.L.D., a seemingly UN intelligence agency, behind her. However, although the opponent was masked, Rosen still recognized her as a Black Widow at a glance from her iconic leather one-piece combat suit and graceful figure. As for whether it was Natasha Romanoff, that was uncertain. After all, unlike in the comics, those who watched the Black Widow movie in his previous life knew that Black Widow was not just one or two, but a large group. Natasha was merely the most outstanding one among her peers. However, considering the current time point, the possibility of her being Natasha was still very high. As for Black Panther, there was no need to say, it was most likely T'Challa. Although the current Black Panther was actually the old King T'Chaka, as a king, the possibility of him leaving his throne and appearing alone in a foreign country was not high. It's just, why would these two be in London at this time? Is it because I stole the vibranium hoe? Rosen found it hard not to connect this situation with what he had done before. And Rosen was indeed right. But not entirely accurate. T'Challa did come to London to investigate the vibranium matter. Black Widow was not, but it was also Rosen's fault. This Black Widow was indeed Natasha Romanoff. Because among the savings banks Rosen robbed in London, several belonged to Dreykov, the controller of the Red Room, as his personal property. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Dreykov, as a high-ranking general, not only brought the Red Room within his jurisdiction under his control but also embezzled massive assets. And after gaining control of the Red Room, he also engaged in various businesses such as assassination and intelligence. Today's Dreykov's industries had already spread throughout Europe. London, as a European financial center, was naturally no exception. Many of these industries were also illicit and therefore needed to be laundered. Thus, Dreykov also opened many similar underground banks, pawn shops, and so on. Rosen's actions in London caused Dreykov considerable losses. In this situation, Dreykov naturally had to send his ace, Natasha, to London to investigate. It was during this investigation that Natasha discovered T'Challa, who also had a suspicious itinerary and was actually there to investigate vibranium. She then proactively launched an attack on T'Challa. As the most outstanding Black Widow of the Red Room, Natasha was naturally very confident in her abilities. Since her official debut, she had already carried out hundreds of missions and never failed once. At this time, she had not yet encountered enemies of the caliber of Hawkeye or Winter Soldier. So, she was quite arrogant. She didn't even put T'Challa, who looked strangely dressed, in her eyes. The result was her first defeat in her life. Although T'Challa's actions were still relatively naive at this time, having consumed the heart-shaped herb and wearing a vibranium suit, he was absolutely a T0-level existence in an era where Iron Man had not yet appeared, Captain America was still in hibernation, and Kamar Taj was secluded from the world. How could Natasha possibly challenge him? From the moment they engaged, Natasha was in a state of complete suppression. Strength, speed, agility, none of them could compare. Her equipment was completely outmatched. If T'Challa hadn't intended to subdue her rather than kill her, Natasha would have died countless times. Soon, Natasha's mask was torn off, revealing the charming face that made countless men's blood boil. I have to say, the Black Widow when she was young was truly stunning. Rosen witnessed the entire engagement between the two through the mechanical animals. Naturally, this included the scene where Black Widow's face was revealed. At this moment, Black Widow also understood her predicament, knowing that she could not be T'Challa's opponent, and without hesitation, she immediately threw out several smoke bombs and fled. If she didn't leave now, she really wouldn't be able to. And although T'Challa completely overwhelmed Natasha in terms of strength, he was, after all, just a warrior and not a professional agent. He chased for a short while before losing her. However, although Natasha escaped T'Challa's pursuit, she did not notice that a group of inconspicuous small animals had already surrounded the area she was in. Tap, tap, tap. Inside the apartment, Rosen sat at his desk, gently tapping the surface while watching Natasha's movements being monitored by his various small pets. As for why he only monitored Natasha and didn't track Black Panther. Of course, it's because Black Panther is easy to find, and Black Widow is not. Black Panther is the Prince of Wakanda, he can't escape his temple. And although Wakanda fights with the most primitive methods, their vibranium technology is truly impressive. Technologies like their spacecraft and defensive energy fields are not something Rosen can easily catch up to right now. Mechanical small animals have little to no chance of tracking Black Panther. Black Widow is different. She operates in secret. If it weren't for this fortunate coincidence, Rosen's desire to catch her tail would have been much harder than finding Wakanda. But now that Rosen has caught her tail, it's a different story. With the mechanical small animals having a wide monitoring range and a large number already deployed, Natasha, who only has her feet in conventional transportation, unless she quickly leaves the London area, as long as she remains in London, it will be difficult for her to escape the monitoring of the small animals. After all, the existence of the mechanical small animals is truly beyond ordinary people's expectations. Especially since these mechanical small animals are extremely good at hiding, making them almost impossible to detect in the dark. And even if they are discovered, their appearance and behavior are not much different from real small animals. So, even a top agent like Natasha, without quickly leaving the London urban area, despite being very vigilant throughout her withdrawal, still failed to notice that she was being tracked and monitored. The location she eventually reached was a rather large building in East London. Clearly, this was Black Widow's personal safe house or one set up by the Red Room in London. This safe house was on the top floor of an apartment building, very spacious with many windows, offering excellent views in all directions. However, the interior facilities were quite rudimentary. There was very little furniture, mostly placed along the sides of the windows to provide some cover, making it difficult to observe the internal details from outside. But overall, it looked exactly like an ordinary residence. Upon entering the safe house, Natasha checked all the window observation points to confirm no one was following her, then she eagerly went to the full-length mirror and took off her clothes. Don't misunderstand, she was just checking her injuries. During her earlier confrontation with T'Challa, although he had held back and hadn't intended to kill her. However, due to the vast difference in their combat power, Natasha still sustained many injuries. After taking off her clothes, her body was covered in various scrapes and bruises. This greatly spoiled Rosen's appetite, as he had initially expected a feast for his eyes. However, Rosen's main purpose in monitoring Natasha was not to peep. Instead, he was considering whether to use this opportunity to contact her and recruit her. Because according to the original plot, this period was when Natasha most desperately wanted to break free from the Red Room. It was precisely for this reason that she would, not long after, upon meeting Hawkeye Barton, be so easily persuaded by him and ultimately choose to join S.H.I.E.L.D. So, if Rosen were to appear at this time and agree to help Natasha deal with Dreykov, then, completely changing Natasha's fate of joining S.H.I.E.L.D. would not be a pipe dream. And if he wanted to succeed, he had to act quickly. Otherwise, once S.H.I.E.L.D. and Natasha made contact, it would be much harder for Rosen to recruit her. Because what Natasha needed was freedom, a certain degree of freedom to live in the light, even though Natasha would still be a tool after joining S.H.I.E.L.D. But at least until S.H.I.E.L.D. fell, she wouldn't have to worry about being wanted. As for later, with the Avengers, once Natasha developed a superhero mentality, there would be even less possibility of her being recruited. In this regard, Rosen, who is still weak and isolated compared to S.H.I.E.L.D., undoubtedly has no advantage. Therefore, Rosen's best chance to recruit Natasha is at this very moment. But the problem is that Rosen can't get to London in a short time. Even if he were to leave immediately and catch a plane, it would take 7 or 8 hours. By the time Rosen arrived in London, it's hard to say if Black Widow would still be there. Control the small animals to contact her. Rosen immediately rejected this idea. Natasha, the Black Widow, is indeed very valuable, but the existence of the mechanical small animals is a very important trump card for Rosen and cannot be exposed. After all, the biggest advantage of mechanical small animals is that they don't attract attention. Once news of their existence spreads and alerts other organizations and individuals, their effectiveness will be half-waste. And the mechanical small animals themselves have no self-preservation ability. However, just as Rosen made up his mind and prepared to make another trip to London. On the other side, Warhawk sent a message. Jessica's condition was a bit off. Rosen immediately became alert upon receiving Warhawk's message. And he immediately switched his vision to Warhawk's perspective. The first scene he saw shocked Rosen. Because Jessica, in his sight, was on a killing spree. Several bodies had already fallen to the ground, and she was slowly crushing the neck of another person in her hand. Although those who died also appeared to be some gangsters and thugs, Rosen could tell from Jessica's struggling expression that her actions were not voluntary. And given Jessica's personality, she wouldn't usually actively kill so many people. She certainly wouldn't slowly crush an opponent's neck, an act clearly indicative of torture. Was she being controlled? Rosen immediately flickered, heading towards Jessica's location. At the same time, he began to use Warhawk's vision to observe the surroundings. Soon, he discovered a man in a purple suit on the windowsill opposite the window of the building where Jessica was currently located. The man was watching Jessica's every move with a smile on his face. At this point, Jessica had finished killing everyone. And under the purple man's control, she was moving towards his location. Soon, Jessica entered the purple man's room. And under the purple man's further control, she struggled as she began to undress. If there were no intervention, without a doubt, Jessica would, just like in the original plot, become this pervert's hot weapon for a considerable period of time. However, none of this would happen. Because in this world, there is Rosen. Just as the extremely arrogant purple man sat in his chair, admiring Jessica's every move, ready to savor this delicious apple. He suddenly saw a hint of surprise in Jessica's eyes. What followed was extreme vigilance. But it was still too late. The next second, he felt himself fly into the air. Then he saw a headless body sitting on the chair, and behind the body, a figure holding a ring-shaped weapon in his hand. That body is mine. In the purple man's utterly bewildered state, he quickly lost consciousness. And with the purple man's death, Jessica was instantly freed from control. Disregarding the fact that she was only in her undergarments, she rushed into the newcomer's arms like a swallow returning to its nest, crying incessantly. Thanks for watching.